Good morning, Americans. Well, today we're live. This is the first time that I'm doing this. I hope that you guys all can hear me. Once again, I'm trying to be the calm and reason for you, the American people. Talk a little bit about what's going on in this country, how we can fix it, and kind of expose the truth. With that being said, as you have seen probably by the title of this thumbnail, that Donald Trump is hiding things from us, the American people. And let's not forget that the American people are who's in charge. There are several documents that have been put out that Donald Trump has tried to cover up. We can talk about the examples of the Epstein files, the Jack Smith report, the election fraud case. There's things that we can talk about. But in order to cover them, I would have to read the documents for you myself. I would want you to hear those words, not from me, but from the actual person who wrote them. For those of you who don't know, Donald Trump has been investigated on multiple occasions. Jack Smith, special counsel, had released a special report on the conspiracy to defraud the United States. That report was released in January of 2025. I want to read that report to you in its entirety so that you can understand exactly what went on with the special counsel that Donald Trump wanted to hide so much. Let me know in the comments section if you can hear me. I would love to confirm that. Make sure that you guys are able to see and understand. This is the final report of the special counsel by Jack Smith. Dear Mr. Attorney General, in the fall of 2022, former President Donald J. Trump was the subject of two separate criminal investigations by the Department of Justice. The first was an investigation into whether any person violated the law in connection with efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election. The second investigation focused on the possession of highly classified documents at Mr. Trump's Mar-a-Lago social club following his presidency. On November 15, 2022, Mr. Trump declared his candidacy to unseat President Joseph Biden Jr., who had previously stated his intention to stand for re-election. Mr. Trump's announcement created a highly unusual situation in which the department and agency within the executive branch, headed by President Biden, was conducting criminal investigations regarding his newly declared challenger. Based on a long-standing recognition that in certain extraordinary cases, it is in the public interest to appoint a special prosecutor to independently manage an investigation and prosecution. You, as the Attorney General, promptly did so here to underscore the department's commitment to both independence and accountability, in particularly sensitive matters. Attorney General Merrick B. Garland remarks on the appointment of a special counsel, Washington, D.C. On the day that I was appointed, I pledged that I would exercise independent judgment, follow the best traditions of the Department of Justice, and conduct my work expeditiously and thoroughly to reach whatever outcome the facts and law dictated. With the aid of an outstanding team, that is what I did. Upon my appointment, I organized a staff of experienced career federal prosecutors, and together we conducted the department's traditions of integrity and nonpartisanship that have guided all of us throughout our careers. Attorney General Edward H. Levy, who assumed the department's helm in the wake of Watergate, summed up those traditions best. One paramount concern must always guide our way. This is the keeping of the faith in the essential decency and even-handedness in the law. A faith which is the strength of the law and which must be continually renewed, or else it is lost. In a society that too easily accepts the notion that everything can be manipulated, it is important to make clear that the administration of federal justice seeks to be impartial and fair. Addressed to the Los Angeles County Bar Association, Los Angeles, of 1976, Attorney General Levy's remarks shared 46 years to the day before my appointment ring as true now as they did then. I have been a career prosecutor in local, national, and international settings over the last 3 decades, working shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of prosecutors in that time. The prosecutors and staff of the special counsel's office are, in my estimation, without peer in terms of accomplishment, capability, judgment, and work ethic. More importantly, in my book, they are people of great decency and the highest personal integrity. The intense public scrutiny of our office, threats to their safety, and relentless unfounded attacks on their character and integrity do not deter them from fulfilling their oaths and professional obligations. These are intensely good people who did hard things well. I will not forget the sacrifices they made and the personal resilience they and their families have shown over the last 2 years. Our country owes them a debt of gratitude for their unwavering service and dedication to the rule of law. Without pause, they have upheld the department's commitment to the impartial and independent pursuit of justice. For that I am grateful, as I know you are as well. Staffed by some of the most experienced prosecutors in the department, my office operated under the same department policies and procedures that guide all federal prosecutors. The regulations under which I was appointed required that we do so, and our work benefited from those processes. The department has long recognized that proceeding with uniformity of policy is necessary to the prestige of federal law. Robert H. Jackson, the federal prosecutor of 1940, as a result, throughout our work, we regularly consulted the Justice Manual, the department's publicly available guidebook on policies and procedures, and adhered to its requirements. Our work rested upon the fundamental value of our democracy that we exist as a government of laws and not of men. John Adams. In making decisions as special counsel, I consider as the first principle whether our actions would contribute to the upholding of the rule of law and acted accordingly. Our committed adherence to the rule of law is why we not only followed department policies and procedures, but strictly observed legal requirements and dutifully respected the judicial decisions and precedents our prosecutions prompted. That is also why, in my decision-making, I heeded the imperative that no man in this country is so high that he is above the law. United States versus Lee, 1882. Simply put, the Department of Justice's guiding mandate, which my office strove to uphold, is that power, politics, influence, status, wealth, fear, and favor should not impede justice under the law. When I assumed responsibility for the matters you assigned me, I came to the work with no preconceived notion of what the just outcome of the investigations would be. I was not yet familiar with all of the relevant facts and had not yet researched the relevant law, depending upon what the investigations revealed. I was equally comfortable closing the investigations, or moving forward with prosecutions in one or both of the matters, having done both in high-profile matters throughout my career. To make prosecutorial determinations, my office gathered relevant evidence and examined whether that evidence established violations of federal criminal law. In doing so, I was guided by the principles of federal prosecution. As a series of considerations designed to promote the fair and even-handed application of the law, as set forth in my report. After conducting thorough investigations, I found that, with respect to both Mr. Trump's unprecedented efforts to unlawfully retain power after losing the 2020 election, and his unlawful retention of classified documents after leaving office, the principles compelled prosecution. Indeed, Mr. Trump's cases represented ones in which the offense was the most flagrant, the public harm the greatest, and the proof of the most certain. As directed by the principles, I made my decision in these cases without regard to Mr. Trump's political association, activities, or beliefs, or the possible personal or professional consequences of a prosecution for me or any member of my office. The likelihood of an acquittal due to unpopularity of some aspect of the prosecution, or because of the overwhelmingly popularity of the defendant or his cause, or the converse, were not factors in my prosecutive decisions. My office also adhered at all times to the department's policy against interfering in elections. As a former chief of the department's public integrity section, it was important to me, as it is to you, that we adhere to the both letter and spirit of this policy. I can assure you that neither I nor the prosecutors on my team would have tolerated or taken part in any action by our office for partisan political purposes. Throughout my service as special counsel, seeking to influence the election one way or the other, or seeking to interfere in its outcome, played no role in our work. My office had one North Star: to follow the facts and law wherever they led, nothing more and nothing less. While I relied greatly on the counsel, judgment, and advice of our team, I want it to be clear that the ultimate decision to bring charges against Mr. Trump was mine. It is a decision I stand fully behind. To have done otherwise on the facts developed during our work would have been to shirk my duties as a prosecutor and a public servant. After nearly 30 years of public service, that is a choice I could not abide. It is equally important for me to make clear that nobody within the Department of Justice ever sought to interfere with or improperly influence my prosecutorial decision-making. The regulations under which I was appointed provided you with the authority to countermand my decisions, but you did not do so, nor did you, the Deputy Attorney General, or members of your staff ever attempt to improperly influence my decision as to whether to bring charges against Mr. Trump. And to all who know me well, the claim for Mr. Trump that my decisions as a prosecutor were influenced or directed by the Biden administration or other political actors is, in a word, laughable. While we were not able to bring the cases we charged to trial, I believe that the fact that our team stood up for the rule of law matters. I believe the example our team set for others to fight for justice without regard for the personal costs matters. The facts as we uncovered them in our investigation and as set forth in my report matter. Experienced prosecutors know that you cannot control outcomes. You can only do your job the right way for the right reasons. I conclude our work confident that we have done so and that we have met fully our obligations to the department and to our country. Accompanying this letter, I have provided you a special confidential report explaining the prosecution, or declination decisions reached by the special counsel. The report consists of 2 volumes. Volume 1 addresses the election case, and Volume 2 addresses the classified documents case. I understand that you are considering whether all or part of my report can be made public, consistent with applicable legal restrictions. Both volumes minimize the identification of witnesses and co-conspirators. Consistent with accepted department practice, and we have provided a redacted version of Volume 2 that identifies certain information that remains under seal or is restricted from public disclosure by Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure. Because Volume 2 discusses the conduct of Mr. Trump's alleged co-conspirators in the classified documents case, Walter Nada and Carlos de Oliveira, consistent with department policy. Volume 2 should not be publicly released while their case remains pending. Though not required, prior to finalizing the report, my office provided an opportunity for counsel for Mr. Trump to review both volumes and for counsel for his former co-defendants in the classified documents case, Mr. Nada and Mr. Oliveira, to review Volume 2. After their review, counsel for Mr. Trump wrote a letter to you, and we have provided a written response to you, both of which you will find as an addendum to the report. With this report, my service and the service of my staff is complete. I thank you for the trust you placed in me and my team, and for according us the independence necessary to conduct our work. Public service is a privilege. We deeply appreciate the opportunity to serve our nation in seeking to uphold the rule of law. Sincerely yours, Jack Smith. Volume 1, The Election Case. Report on efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on January 6, 2021. Sorry, it's taking a moment for me to actually get to the writing. The election case. Hang on one second. Thank you for tuning in. For those of you who don't know, I am currently reading the Jack Smith report, which was released in January 2025, shortly before President Donald Trump actually became president. This is to provide clarity. This live stream is to provide clarity on that case by reading you the report, as I'm sure most of you didn't really get a chance to read yourselves. On November 18th, 2022, the Attorney General appointed the special counsel to oversee an ongoing investigation into whether any person or entity violated the law in connection with efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on or about January 6, 2021. See Office of the Attorney General. Appointment of John Smith as special counsel, November 2022. As a result of that investigation, on August 1st, 2023, a federal grand jury in the District of Columbia charged Donald J. Trump with 4 felony offenses arising from his efforts to unlawfully retain power by using fraud and deceit to overturn the 2020 election results. After the Supreme Court held last summer that Mr. Trump was immune from prosecution for certain misuse of official power alleged in the indictment, a second grand jury found probable cause to return a superseding indictment. I just want to see. Thank you. Superseding indictment charging the same offenses based on his non-immunized conduct. Mr. Trump was thereafter reelected as President of the United States. And as a result, on November 25th, 2024, the special counsel moved to dismiss the case against Mr. Trump because of the Department of Justice's longstanding position that the Constitution forbids the federal indictment and prosecution of a sitting president. This volume focuses on the election case against Mr. Trump and, consistent with the applicable regulations, provides an explanation of the prosecution decisions reached by the special counsel. The first section of this volume sets forth a summary of key facts gleaned from the investigation, a vast majority of which are already a matter of public record through the litigation that occurred before the district court. The second section discusses the statutes that Mr. Trump was charged with violating, applying the facts developed during the investigation to the law as the special counsel's office understood it. This section also addresses other charges that the office considered but did not pursue, and the defenses that the office expected Mr. Trump to raise at trial. The third section explains why the special counsel's decision to prosecute Mr. Trump was fully consistent with, and indeed was compelled by, the principles of federal prosecution. The fourth section describes the office's investigative procedures and policies. Finally, the fifth section of this volume discusses a series of investigative and prosecutive issues that the office confronted in the election case. The results of the investigation. In 2020, then President Donald J. Trump ran for re-election against Joseph R. Biden. Mr. Trump lost. As alleged in the original and superseding indictments, substantial evidence demonstrates that Mr. Trump then engaged in an unprecedented criminal effort to overturn the legitimate results of the election in order to retain power. Although he did so primarily in his private capacity as a candidate, and with the assistance of multiple private co-conspirators, Mr. Trump also attempted to use the power and authority of the United States government in furtherance of his scheme. As set forth in the original and superseding indictments, when it became clear that Mr. Trump had lost the election and that lawful means of challenging the election results had failed, he resorted to a series of criminal efforts to retain power. This included attempts to induce state officials to ignore true vote counts, to manufacture fraudulent slates of presidential electors in 7 states that he had lost, to force Justice Department's officials and his own Vice President, Michael R. Pence, to act in contravention of their oaths and to instead advance Mr. Trump's personal interests. And on January 6, 2021, to direct an angry mob to the United States Capitol to obstruct the congressional certification of the presidential election, and then leverage rioters' violence to further delay it. In service of these efforts, Mr. Trump worked with other people to achieve a common plan, to overturn the election results and perpetuate himself in office. These individuals included co-conspirator 1, a private attorney who was willing to spread knowingly false claims and pursue strategies that Mr. Trump's campaign attorneys would not. Co-conspirator 2, a private attorney who devised and attempted to implement a strategy to leverage the vice president's ministerial role in the certification proceeding to obstruct the certification. Co-conspirator 3, a private attorney whose unfounded claims of election fraud Mr. Trump privately acknowledged were crazy, but which he embraced and publicly amplified nonetheless. Co-conspirator 4, a Justice Department official who worked on civil matters and who, with Mr. Trump, attempted to use the Justice Department to open sham election crime investigations and influence state legislatures with knowingly false claims of election fraud. Co-conspirator 5, a private attorney who assisted in devising and attempting to implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding. And co-conspirator 6, a private political consultant who helped implement a plan to submit fraudulent slates of presidential electors to obstruct the certification proceeding. The through line of all of Mr. Trump's criminal efforts was deceit, knowingly false claims of election fraud. And the evidence shows that Mr. Trump used these lies as a weapon to defeat a federal government function foundational to the United States democratic process. Mr. Trump's false claims included dozens of specific claims regarding certain states, such as the large number of dead, non resident, non citizen, or otherwise ineligible voters that had cast ballots, or that voting machines had changed votes for Mr. Trump to votes against him. These claims were demonstrably, and in many cases obviously false. The office investigated whether Mr. Trump believed the claims he made. Evidence from a variety of sources established that Mr. Trump knew that there was no outcome determinative fraud in the 2020 election, that many of the special claims he made were untrue, and that he had lost the election. He knew this because some of the highest ranking officials in his own administration, including the vice president, told him directly that there was no evidence to support his claims. Mr. Trump's private advisors, both within and outside of his campaign, told him the same. On November 13th, his own campaign conceded its litigation in Arizona, a state pivotal to his re-election prospects. State officials and legislatures whom Mr. Trump pressured to change vote tallies or stop certifications of results rebuffed him and informed him that his fraud claims were wrong, both privately and through public statements. Mr. Trump also monitored legal developments regarding the election and was on notice that state and federal courts rejected every post-election lawsuit that Mr. Trump and his allies filed claiming outcome determinative election fraud. Mr. Trump and co-conspirators could not have believed the specific fraud claims that they were making because the numbers they touted, for instance, of dead voters in a particular state, frequently vacillated wildly from day to day or were objectively impossible. Including, for example, co-conspirator 3's claims about voting machines that Mr. Trump privately acknowledged sounded crazy before he publicly amplified. Finally, at times, Mr. Trump made comments implicitly acknowledging that he knew he had lost the election. For example, in January 3, 2021, Oval Office meeting regarding a national security matter, Mr. Trump stated in part, "It's too late for us. We're going to give that to the next guy," meaning President-elect Biden. Mr. Trump aimed his deceit at the United States process of collecting, counting, and certifying votes, which flows from the Constitution and a federal law enacted in 1887, called the Electoral Count Act. The Constitution provides that the United States President is selected through the votes of individuals called electors, and that each state determines how to appoint its electors. Through state laws, all 50 states and the District of Columbia have chosen to select electors based on the popular vote. Therefore, after Election Day, pursuant to the ECA, each state formally determines or ascertains its electors based on the popular vote. The ascertained electors meet on a day determined by the ECA and cast their votes based on their state's popular vote. And the ascertained electors mail their electoral votes, along with the certification from the state executive that they are the state's legitimate electors, to the United States Congress to be counted and certified in an official proceeding. The Constitution and ECA provide that on the 6th of January following Election Day, the Congress meets for that certification proceeding, which is presided over by the Vice President as the President of the Senate. The legitimate electors' votes are opened and counted, and the winner is certified. Until Mr. Trump obstructed it, this democratic process had operated in a peaceful and orderly manner for more than 130 years. Mr. Trump's pressure on state officials. One of Mr. Trump's efforts to change the results of the election involved targeting the electoral process at the state level through politically aligned state officials. Mr. Trump contacted state legislators and executives, pressured them with false claims of election fraud in their states, and urged them to take action to ignore the vote counts and change the results. Significantly, he made election claims only to state legislators and executives who shared his political affiliation and were his political supporters, and only in states that he had lost. If you like what you're hearing, give me a thumbs up and leave a comment. Let others know that this is being read out loud so that we can get the truth out. For instance, Mr. Trump and co-conspirator 1 called the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives on November 22nd, and used false fraud claims to try to convince the Speaker to call the state legislature into session and replace Arizona's legitimate electors with Mr. Trump's illegitimate ones. Co-conspirator 1 tried to coerce the Arizona Speaker, including by telling him, "We're all kind of Republicans and we need to be working together." The Arizona Speaker refused to do what he was asked and requested that co-conspirator 1 provide evidence to support his fraud claims. Co-conspirator 1 not only failed to ever provide such evidence, but he conceded to the Arizona Speaker at an in-person meeting a week later that we don't have the evidence, but we have lots of theories. Despite this lack of fraud evidence, Mr. Trump and others continued to pressure Arizona Speaker to overturn the election results. Mr. Trump similarly leaned on other state officials, always those of the same political party. On January 2nd, 2021, just days before the election results were to be certified, he called Georgia State's Secretary of State and pressed him to find 11,780 votes. Mr. Biden's margin of victory in that state. When the Secretary of State refuted Mr. Trump's false fraud claims, Mr. Trump issued a threat, stating that because of the Secretary of State knew what they did and you're not reporting it, that's a criminal offense. And you can't let that happen. That's a big risk to you. Mr. Trump also pressed state legislatures in Michigan by inviting them to the White House on November 20th, raising false claims of election fraud and bringing co-conspirator 1 into the meeting by phone. Michigan's Senate Majority Leader told Mr. Trump that he had lost the election not because of fraud, but because he had underperformed with educated females, an assessment that displeased Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump engaged in these efforts even though trusted state and party officials had told him the outset that there was no evidence of fraud in the election. In Arizona, Mr. Trump called the governor on November 9th, a week after the election day, and after both Fox News and the Associated Press had projected that Mr. Trump had lost the state. Using a baseball metaphor, the governor told Mr. Trump that it was the 9th inning, 2 outs, and he was several runs down. During the call, Mr. Trump raised false claims of election fraud. The governor asked Mr. Trump to send evidence of the alleged fraud, and Mr. Trump suggested we could do so. He never did. In Pennsylvania, just 2 days after the election, the chairman of the state's Republican Party, who had represented Mr. Trump in a previous election litigation, refuted Mr. Trump's claims that it was suspicious that his early lead was slipping away. The chairman explained that there were still roughly 1,750,000 mail-in ballots being counted, which were expected to weigh heavily in Mr. Biden's favor. In the course of conversations like these, state officials, better positioned than Mr. Trump to know the facts in their states, repeatedly told Mr. Trump that his fraud claims were unfounded and that there was no evidence of substantial election fraud in their states. And apart from Georgia's state secretary, Mr. Trump never contacted other election officials to determine whether there was merit to any specific allegation of election fraud in their states, even though they would have been the best sources to confirm or refute such claims. Go ahead and give me a like there and let me know what you guys think in the comments section. I am reading Jack Smith's special counsel report dated January of 2025. As December 14th, the date the ECA required each state's electors to vote and send their certificates of vote to Congress approached, Mr. Trump and co-conspirators launched another plan. Under this plan, they would organize the people who would have served as Mr. Trump's electors. Had he won the popular vote in 7 states that Mr. Trump had lost, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and caused them to sign and send to Washington false certifications claiming as a contingency to preserve the possibility that Mr. Trump's electors' votes would be counted on January 6th if he prevailed in ongoing election litigation. But as described below, the plan quickly quickly transformed into a corrupt strategy to obstruct the certification proceeding and overturn the valid election results. Mr. Trump set the fraudulent elector plan into motion in early December, ensured that it was carried out by co-conspirators and campaign agents in the targeted states, and monitored its progress. On December 6, for instance, Mr. Trump's and co-conspirator 2 called the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee and told her that it was important for the RNC to help organize Mr. Trump's elector nominees in the targeted states. During the call, co-conspirator 2 told a lie that the co-conspirators would use to induce the cooperation of many of the fraudulent electors, that Mr. Trump's electors' votes would be used only if ongoing litigation in their state proved successful for Mr. Trump. From that point on, Mr. Trump communicated with co-conspirators 1 and 2 about the plan, and they in turn communicated with co-conspirators 5 and 6. At co-conspirator 1's direction, co-conspirator 5 generated and sent directions to the Trump electors in each targeted state on how best to mimic the manner in which the state required valid electors to gather and vote, and campaign staff and agents helped carry out co-conspirator 5's plans. For the most part, the co-conspirators deceived Mr. Trump's elector nominees in the targeted states by falsely claiming that their electoral votes would be used only if ongoing litigation were resolved in Mr. Trump's favor. Indeed, the co-conspirators deliberately withheld from the elector nominees information showing otherwise. This deception was crucial to the conspiracy, as many who participated as fraudulent electors would not have done so had they known the true extent of the co-conspirators' plans. Not all of Mr. Trump's elector nominees were persuaded, forcing the co-conspirators to recruit substitutes in some of the targeted states. For example, one Trump elector nominee in Pennsylvania recognized the plan as illegal and an attempt to overthrow the government, and he declined to participate. Conversely, a select few of Mr. Trump's agents and elector nominees had insight into the ultimate plan to use the fraudulent elector certificates to disrupt the congressional certification on January 6th and willingly assisted. On December 9th, after a phone call with co-conspirator 5, one of the campaign's agents wrote in an email that co-conspirator 5's plan for the electors to send in fake electoral votes to Pence was kind of a wild creative. 2.5 hours later, he replied to his own email and as cover wrote that alternative votes is probably a better term than fake votes, and that he agreed with the suggestion to keep the plan under wraps until Congress counts the vote on January 6th. In each of the targeted states, Mr. Trump and his co-conspirators successfully organized enough elector nominees and substitutes to gather on December 14th, cast fraudulent electoral votes on his behalf, and send them to Washington, D.C. for the congressional certification. A fact that the RNC chairwoman relayed to Mr. Trump on the evening of December 14th. At the same time that Mr. Trump's elector nominees in the targeted states were preparing to gather and cast fraudulent votes, his co-conspirators were planning to use them to overturn the election results at the January 6th certification. On December 13th, co-conspirator 5 sent co-conspirator 1 a memorandum that envisioned a scenario in which the vice president would use the fraudulent slates to claim that there were dueling slates of electors from the targeted states and negotiate a solution for Mr. Trump to seize power. And on December 16th, co-conspirator 5 traveled to Washington with a group of private attorneys who had done work for Mr. Trump's campaign in Wisconsin for a meet and greet with Mr. Trump in the Oval Office. As the group left, co-conspirator 5 had a direct private conversation with Mr. Trump. Days later, on December 19th, Mr. Trump publicly posted a tweet demonstrating his own focus on the certification and directing his supporters to gather in Washington, D.C. to oppose it. At 1:42 a.m., he posted a copy of a report falsely alleging outcome-determinative election fraud and wrote, "Statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election." Big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there. Will be wild. That same day, co-conspirator 5 notified another attendee of the December 16th Oval Office meeting of Mr. Trump's tweet, and he indicated that Mr. Trump had privately foreshadowed his plans for January 6th, writing, "Wow, based on 3 days ago, I think we have a unique understanding of this." Mr. Trump's misuse of official power through the Judicial Department. Let me get something to drink. This is kind of a long document. As his efforts to directly pressure state officials to discount legitimate votes failed and the fraudulent election plan unfolded, Mr. Trump also tried another tack. He attempted to wield federal power to perpetuate his fraud claims and retain office. Mr. Trump was frustrated with the Justice Department because its criminal investigations had identified no evidence of substantial fraud, and the Attorney General had publicly acknowledged this fact in an interview on December 1st by saying, among other things, "To date, we have not seen fraud on a scale that could have affected a different outcome in the election." As a result, Mr. Trump considered appointing co-conspirator 4, a Justice Department attorney who worked on civil matters, to be the acting Attorney General. Because as described below, co-conspirator 4 was willing to use the Justice Department to spread Mr. Trump's lies and pressure targeted states to overturn election results. Throughout the post-election period, Justice Department officials reviewed Mr. Trump's claims of election fraud, found no support for any of them, and informed him of such. In one such discussion, when the acting Attorney General advised Mr. Trump that the Justice Department could not just snap its fingers and change the election outcome, Mr. Trump told the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General that they should just say that the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. In the same call, alluding to the replacing Justice Department leadership if they did not do as he directed, Mr. Trump also said, "People tell me co-conspirator 4 is great. I should put him in." Mr. Trump knew about co-conspirator 4 because he had been introduced to co-conspirator 4 by a member of Congress and had been secretly engaging with co-conspirator 4, who was communicating with Mr. Trump in contravention of policies designed to protect the independence of the Justice Department. On December 28th, as his secret communications with Mr. Trump continued, co-conspirator 4 emailed the acting Attorney General and acting Deputy Attorney General a proposed letter that falsely claimed that the Justice Department had identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, and recommended that those states' legislatures convene in special session to reconsider certification of their electoral votes. Co-conspirator 4 proposed to send it to the governor, speaker, and president pro temp of each relevant state to indicate that in light of time urgency and sworn evidence of election irregularities presented to courts and to legislative committees, the legislatures thereof should each assemble and make a decision about elector appointment in light of their deliberations. Within about an hour of receiving the draft letter, the acting Deputy Attorney General pointedly rejected co-conspirators 4 proposal, writing, "I know of nothing that would support the statement. We have identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states." He also observed the Justice Department had no role in states' administration of their own elections, writing, "I cannot imagine a scenario in which the department would recommend that a state assemble its legislature to determine whether already certified election results should somehow be overridden by a legislative action. Nonetheless, Mr. Trump continued to circumvent Justice Department leadership and engage directly with co-conspirator 4. With Mr. Trump's intervention, co-conspirator 4 obtained a highly classified briefing on a foreign interference in the 2020 election on January 2, 2021. A briefing that yielded nothing to support the conspirators' allegations, as demonstrated by contemporaneous electronic messages between co-conspirator 4 and the same member of Congress who had introduced co-conspirator 4 to Mr. Trump. Yet the following day, Mr. Trump attempted to install co-conspirator 4 as the acting Attorney General. On January 3rd, after Mr. Trump offered the position to co-conspirator 4 and co-conspirator 4 informed Justice Department senior leadership that he was accepting it, Mr. Trump, co-conspirator 4, and senior officials from the Justice Department and White House counsel's office gathered for a hastily scheduled meeting in the Oval Office. Mr. Trump made clear that he wanted to appoint co-conspirator 4 because co-conspirator 4 would cause the Justice Department to send to the targeted states the false letter that the acting Attorney General and the acting Deputy Attorney General had rejected as inaccurate and improper. Mr. Trump ultimately did not do so, only because he was informed that if he did, mass resignations within the Justice Department and the White House would result in co-conspirator 4 leading a graveyard. Near the end of the meeting, when co-conspirator 4 raised the idea of the Justice Department opining on the Vice President's role during the congressional certification, Mr. Trump told all those assembled that no one other than him should be talking to the Vice President. Mr. Trump's pressure on the Vice President. Mr. Trump wanted no one else speaking with Vice President Pence because he and co-conspirators were already implementing a secret plan to use Mr. Pence's ministerial role as the President of the Senate to Mr. Trump's advantage. Co-conspirator 2, with assistance from co-conspirators 5 and 6, spearheaded the execution of a strategy, which co-conspirator 2 had recently conceded was not supported by the Constitution or federal law. For Mr. Pence to decline to count the legitimate electoral certificates in the targeted states where Mr. Trump's electors had signed fraudulent ones. In the weeks before the certification, Mr. Trump began pressuring Mr. Pence to cooperate, both directly and by mobilizing Mr. Trump's supporters. In repeated conversations, day after day, Mr. Trump pressed Mr. Pence to use his ministerial position as President of the Senate to change the election outcome, often by citing false claims of election fraud as justification. He even falsely told Mr. Pence that the Justice Department was finding major infractions. When Mr. Pence repeatedly refused to act as Mr. Trump wanted, Mr. Trump told him that hundreds of thousands of people would hate his guts and think he was stupid, and that Mr. Pence was too honest. Surrounding these communications, Mr. Trump frequently took to Twitter to extort supporters to travel to Washington for January 6th, such as when he tweeted on January 1st, "The big protest rally in Washington, D.C. will take place at 11 a.m. on January 6th. Locational details to follow. Stop the steal." On January 4th, 2 days before the certification proceeding, Mr. Trump arranged for Mr. Pence to meet with co-conspirator 2 in the Oval Office in hopes that co-conspirator 2 would convince Mr. Pence to accede. During the meeting, co-conspirator 2 outlined 2 ways that he claimed Mr. Pence could affect the election outcome using his role in the certification. He could reject the legitimate electors outright, denying Mr. Biden an electoral majority and likely sending the selection to the House of Representatives, where fellow Republicans controlled the majority of state delegations. Or he could send the elector slates to targeted states' legislatures for them to choose which electoral votes should be counted. Affording Republican-controlled legislatures the opportunity to reject Mr. Biden's electors and replace them with Mr. Trump's. In response to Mr. Pence's questioning, co-conspirator 2 admitted that both proposals violated the ECA and were untested. When Mr. Pence turned to Mr. Trump and pointed out that even Mr. Trump's lawyers, co-conspirator 2, did not think Mr. Pence had the authority to return electoral votes to the states, Mr. Trump responded that he liked the other thing better, which Mr. Pence understood to mean Mr. Pence simply rejecting the electoral votes outright. In the end, Mr. Pence again stated that he did not believe he could do what he was being asked. That night, Mr. Trump used a speech in Dalton, Georgia, to focus the crowd on the idea that Mr. Pence could change the results of the election, saying, "I hope Mike Pence comes through for us. I have to tell you, I hope that our great vice president comes through for us. Of course, if he doesn't come through, I won't like him quite as much." The next day, on January 5th, when Mr. Trump again failed to make headway with Mr. Pence in private conversation, Mr. Trump warned that he would have to publicly criticize Mr. Pence. Mr. Trump then, in response to a New York Times report on the conversation between Mr. Trump and Mr. Pence, issued a false statement claiming the Vice President and I are in total agreement that the Vice President has the power to act. Mr. Trump's supporters attack the United States Capitol. Mr. Trump's efforts to remain in power converged and culminated on January 6th, the day that Mr. Biden was to be certified president. That day, Mr. Trump was scheduled to speak at the Ellipse to the crowd of supporters he had summoned to Washington with false claims of election fraud. At around 1 a.m. on the morning of January 6th, Mr. Trump tweeted, "If Vice President Mike Pence comes through for us, we will win the presidency." Many states want to decertify the mistake they made in certifying incorrect and even fraudulent numbers in a process not approved by their state legislatures, which it must be. Mike can send it back. Just before he left the White House to give his speech at the Ellipse, Mr. Trump phoned Mr. Pence one last time. And when Mr. Pence told Mr. Trump that he planned to issue a public statement, making it clear that he lacked the authority to do what Mr. Trump wanted, Mr. Trump expressed anger at him. He then directed staffers to reinsert into his planned Ellipse speech some language that he had drafted earlier targeting Mr. Pence. During his speech at the Ellipse, Mr. Trump made one more attempt to retain power. In his remarks, Mr. Trump repeated many of the same lies he had been telling for months regarding dead voters, non-citizen voters, and vote dumps, and he told newer ones, lies that targeted states wanted to change their electors, and that Mr. Pence had the authority and might be persuaded to change the election results. The lie regarding Mr. Pence was particularly deceptive because Mr. Trump knew what his supporters in the crowd did not, that Mr. Pence had just told him in no uncertain terms that he would not do what Mr. Trump was demanding. Mr. Trump told a crowd of his supporters that he had remarked to advisors the night before was angry, that the election had been stolen, and the country would no longer exist if this purported crime were not stopped, and that the discovery of fraud licensed them to go by very different rules. Although Mr. Trump at one point also told his supporters to peacefully and patriotically make their voices heard, he used the word fight more than 10 times in the speech before concluding by directing his supporters to march to the Capitol to give allied members of Congress the kind of pride and boldness they need to take back our country. He also told the angry crowd that if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Throughout the speech, Mr. Trump gave his supporters false hope that through such actions they could cause Mr. Pence to overturn the election results, even improvising new lines directed at Mr. Pence as the speech went on. At Mr. Trump's urging, thousands of his supporters marched from the Ellipse to the Capitol building. There, Mr. Pence began the certification at around 1 p.m. Outside the building, the crowd swelled and broke through barriers, cordoning off the grounds. The crowd that attacked the Capitol was filled with Mr. Trump's supporters, as made clear by their Trump shirts, signs, and flags. As described in detail below, the crowd violently attacked the law enforcement officers attempting to secure the building. Just a lot of pictures of January 6th and the rioters. After his speech, Mr. Trump returned to the White House and at around 1:30 p.m. settled in the dining room of the Oval Office. There, he watched television news coverage of events at the Capitol and reviewed Twitter on his phone. When the angry crowd advanced on the Capitol building and breached it at around 2:13 p.m., forcing the Senate to recess, several of Mr. Trump's advisors rushed to the dining room and told him that a riot had started at the Capitol and that rioters were in the building. Over the course of the afternoon, they forcefully urged Mr. Trump to issue calming messages to his supporters. Mr. Trump resisted, repeatedly, remarking that the people at the Capitol were angry because the election had been stolen. Just before 2:24 p.m., the news channel playing on the television in the dining room where Mr. Trump was sitting aired an interview with an individual marching from the ellipse to the Capitol, who expressed his anger at Mr. Pence and stated, "But I still believe President Trump has something else left." Then at 2:24 p.m., sitting alone, Mr. Trump issued a tweet attacking Mr. Pence and fueling the riot. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. USA demands the truth. 1 minute later, the United States Secret Service was forced to evacuate Mr. Pence to a secure location at the Capitol. When an advisor at the White House learned this, he rushed to the dining room and informed Mr. Trump, who replied, "So what?" The rioters at the Capitol had been motivated and directed by Mr. Trump, and he continued to resist advisors' requests to direct them to leave. Throughout the afternoon, crowds at the Capitol hunted for Mr. Pence and other lawmakers, with some chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." At 2:38 p.m. and 3:30 p.m., Mr. Trump issued two tweets falsely suggesting that events at the Capitol were peaceful and asking individuals there, whom he termed "we," to remain that way. "Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful. And I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful. No violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you." At 4:17 p.m., he tweeted a video message in which he, for the first time, asked supporters to leave the Capitol, while at the same time falsely claiming that we had an election that was stolen from us, a landslide election, and embracing the people who had attacked the Capitol, telling them, "We love you, you're very special." And at 6:01 p.m., he tweeted, "These are the things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever." At around the same time as he issued his 6:01 p.m. tweet, Mr. Trump tried to reach two United States senators, and he also directed co-conspirator 1 to call members of Congress in an attempt to enlist them to further delay the certification. When Mr. Trump's White House counsel called him at around 7 p.m. and asked him to withdraw any objections to the certification, Mr. Trump refused. Nonetheless, the certification resumed late in the evening of January 6th, and at 3:41 a.m. on January 7th, Mr. Pence announced the certified results of the 2020 presidential election in favor of Mr. Biden. As he did in his 4:17 p.m. and 6:01 p.m. tweets on January 6th, Mr. Trump has provided additional evidence of his intent by continuing to support and ally himself with the people who attacked the Capitol. He has called them patriots and hostages, reminisced about January 6th as a beautiful day, and championed the January 6th Choir, a group of January 6th defendants who, because of their dangerousness, are detained at the District of Columbia Jail. The law. Let me get something to drink real quick. If you guys like this so far, please give me a like, leave a comment. I'm just reading the Jack Smith report for your benefit. Based on the above facts, and after analyzing the relevant criminal statutes, the office sought and a grand jury found probable cause for an indictment of Mr. Trump on 4 federal charges: conspiring to obstruct the governmental function of selecting and certifying the President of the United States, obstructing and attempting to obstruct the official proceeding on January 6, 2021, conspiring to obstruct the official proceeding, and conspiring to violate the federal rights of citizens to vote and have their votes counted. Because of the unprecedented facts and the variety of legal issues that would be litigated in this case, the office was aware that the case would involve litigation risks, as would any case of this scope and complexity. However, after an exhaustive and detailed review of the law, the office concluded that the charges were well supported and would survive any legal challenges absent a change in the law as it existed at the time of the indictment. As set forth in Section 5D below, after the original indictment was returned, the Supreme Court ruled in Trump v. United States that Mr. Trump had absolute immunity for core presidential conduct, enjoyed a rebuttal presumption of immunity for other official presidential acts, and had no immunity for unofficial conduct. The Supreme Court's decision required the office to reanalyze the evidence it had collected. The original indictment alleged that Mr. Trump, as the incumbent president, used all available tools and powers, both private and official, to overturn the legitimate results of the election despite notice, including from official advisors, that his fraud claims were false and he had lost the election. Given the Supreme Court's ruling, the office reevaluated the evidence and assessed whether Mr. Trump's non-immune conduct, either his private conduct as a candidate or official conduct for which the office could rebut the presumption of immunity, violated federal law. The office concluded that it did. After doing so, the office sought a new grand jury issued a superseding indictment with identical charges, but based only on conduct that was not immune because it was either unofficial or any presumptive immunity could be rebutted. This section reviews the federal laws violated by Mr. Trump's non-immunized conduct. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. The defraud clause of the general conspiracy statute makes it a crime if two or more persons conspire to defraud the United States or any agency thereof in any manner or for any purpose, and one or more of such persons do any act to effect the object of the conspiracy. The defraud clause applies not just to schemes to cheat the government out of money or property, but also to schemes to interfere with or obstruct one of its lawful governmental functions by deceit, craft, or trickery, or at least by means that are dishonest. Under long-standing established precedent, the government must prove the following elements to establish a violation of the defraud clause. The defendant entered into an agreement to obstruct a lawful function of the government or an agency of the government by deceitful or dishonest means, and at least one overt act was taken in furtherance of that conspiracy. The office concluded that Mr. Trump's conduct satisfied each of the established elements of a defraud clause offense. Process of selecting and certifying the president as described above and prescribed by the Constitution and federal law is plainly a lawful function of the federal government. The presidential electors exercise a federal functions under discharge duties in virtue of authority conferred by the Constitution of the United States, noting that the unique congressional function of certifying electoral college votes. Indeed, Mr. Trump never challenged the indictment on that basis, though he filed more than 100 pages in support of dismissal motions. As the Court of Appeals found in the context of the immunity litigation in this case, former President Trump's alleged efforts to remain in power despite losing the 2020 election were, if proven, an unprecedented assault on the structure of our government. Mr. Trump also sought to obstruct the certification. His sole objective was to ensure that no one other than himself was certified as president. Nor is there any doubt that Mr. Trump conspired with others to achieve his goal, and that at least one overt act was committed. With 3 of the 4 elements of a Section 371 violation established, the office anticipated that a central dispute at trial would be whether Mr. Trump pursued his obstructive purpose by deceit, craft, or trickery, or at least by the means that are dishonest. The office concluded that the evidence established beyond a reasonable doubt that he did. The core of Mr. Trump's obstructive scheme was a false narrative of outcome determinative voter fraud, which he and his surrogates frequently repeated and wildly disseminated over the course of 2 months. Crucially, not only was Mr. Trump's voter fraud narrative objectively false, he knew it was false. Mr. Trump's false claims were repeatedly debunked, often directly to him by the very people best positioned to ascertain the truth. Campaign personnel told Mr. Trump his claims were unfounded. So did state officials. A White House official who engaged with Mr. Trump in his capacity as a candidate and even his own running mate, for example, Mr. Trump's campaign manager, informed him that a claim that had been circulating that a substantial number of non-citizens had voted in Arizona was false. State officials issued public statements dispelling Mr. Trump's claims of widespread election fraud. Georgia's Secretary of State refuted multiple false claims of election fraud directly to Mr. Trump, including the false allegation that 5,000 dead people had voted in Georgia. When Mr. Trump raised various fraud allegations with Michigan Senate Majority Leader, he was told that he had lost because he had underperformed with educated females. Vice President Pence told Mr. Trump that he had seen no evidence of outcome determinative fraud in the election. And tellingly, a senior advisor reiterated to Mr. Trump that the co-conspirator won, who would be unable to prove his false fraud allegations in court, to which Mr. Trump responded, "The details don't matter." Courts in which Mr. Trump brought numerous lawsuits all rebuffed his claims, which in some instances prompted him to issue public rebukes acknowledging those decisions. Still, other federal and state officials, some appointed by Mr. Trump, and others who publicly supported and voted for him, publicly debunked allegations of outcome determinative voter fraud. Mr. Trump did not reach out to any of these officials to ask relevant questions about the election because he was not seeking honest answers. This was a pattern revealed throughout the investigation. Mr. Trump unquestioningly accepted at face value and amplified election fraud claims that benefited his quest to retain power. Conversely, he avoided consulting informed sources, such as the state election officials, who possessed evidence that could debunk his claims. The office concluded that this consistent pattern would constitute powerful proof at trial that Mr. Trump knew the claims he was making were false. Mr. Trump's false claims were often divergent from one day to the next and otherwise internally inconsistent. For example, in Arizona, the conspirators started with the allegation that 36,000 non-citizens voted in that state. 5 days later, it was beyond credulity that a few 100,000 didn't vote. 3 weeks later, the bare minimum was 40 to 50,000. The reality is about 250,000 days. The reality is about 250,000. Days after that, the assertion was 32,000, and ultimately, the conspirators landed back where they had started, at 36,000, a false figure they never verified or corroborated. And in Georgia, the conspirators initially suggested that a large enough number of dead voters had cast ballots to overcome Mr. Trump's losing margin of about 12,000 voters. 1 month later, the number was 10,315. 3 days after that, the assertion was close to 5,000 people. And then 2 days later, the number bounced back to 10,315. Mr. Trump bears legal responsibility for each of these false claims because they were made by him and his co-conspirators in furtherance of the conspiracy that he led. The partners in the criminal plan must agree to pursue the same criminal objective and may divide up the work, yet each is responsible for the acts of each other. Statement by an opposing party's conspirator during and in furtherance of conspiracies in it is admissible against that party. The office developed further evidence of Mr. Trump's knowledge that his claims were untrue from witnesses who reported that he planned to use fraud claims. Before the election had even happened, for instance, in addition of the election, advisors told Mr. Trump that the election would be close and that initial returns might be misleading. showing an early lead for Mr. Trump that would diminish as mail-in ballots were counted. In response, Mr. Trump suggested that if that prediction were true, which it ultimately was, he would simply declare victory before all ballots were counted and a winner was projected. He also made repeated public statements in a lead up to Election Day in which he sowed public doubt in the election results, setting the stage for his later fraud claims. And Mr. Trump made his first statement claiming fraud in the election only hours after the polls closed, when no investigations had begun, much less concluded. Mr. Trump's intent in spreading knowing falsehoods was further evidenced by statements he made to those around him. In private, in contrast with his public false claims, Mr. Trump made admissions that reflected his understanding that he had lost. In a private moment, Mr. Trump confessed to his family members that it doesn't matter if you won or lost the election. You still have to fight like hell. When President-elect Biden appeared on television in November, Mr. Trump said to a staffer, "Can you believe I lost to this effing guy?" And when his own vice president declined to join the conspiracy, Mr. Trump berated him for being too honest. Because the evidence showed that Mr. Trump knew his claims were false, it amply satisfied the mens rea standard for a Section 371 charge, which would be satisfied by evidence that Mr. Trump either knew his fraud claims were false or they acted with deliberate disregard for their truth or falsity. The concept of deliberate disregard, sometimes referred to as a reckless disregard or reckless deliberate indifference, has deep roots in the law of fraud. Whether the party thus misrepresenting a material fact knew it to be false or made the assertion without knowing whether it were true or false is wholly immaterial, for the affirmation of what one does not know or believe to be true is equally in morals and law as unjustifiable as the affirmation of what is known to be positively false. That concept is reflected in case law and jury instructions for the District of Columbia, as well as precedent from every other circuit. One criminal jury Here, the evidence showed that Mr. Trump decided even before the election that he would allege outcome-determinative fraud. Whether it occurred or not, if he were not declared the winner, and he adhered to that plan, repeating false claims that he knew to be untrue. Although Mr. Trump's conduct fell comfortably within the established elements of the defraud clause offense, the office noted that the Supreme Court has, in several recent decisions, limited the reach of other federal fraud and obstruction statutes. Reversing conviction of construction contractor for wire fraud for scheming with public officials to tailor bid requirements for government contractors to favor himself because the government did not prove the defendant deprived the victim of a traditional property interest. Just to let you know, these are just different court cases that I'm citing as legal precedent. Has nothing to do with Mr. Trump himself. Convictions for wire fraud, federal program fraud, where defendants aimed to inflict political retribution on a mayor by closing lanes of a bridge that served the mayor's city because of the object of the scheme was not to obtain money or property. Another one to reach only core bribery and kickbacks, and reversing conviction of executive who was convicted of making false statements to inflate his company's value but was not alleged to be taking bribes. Given these decisions restricting the reach of other fraud and corruption statutes, the office considered whether the Supreme Court might also adopt a new construction of the defraud clause in Section 371, such as one that would, for the first time, limit it to money or property fraud. The office concluded, however, that the creation of such a new rule would not be supported in the law, given that the well-established elements of a defraud clause offense are firmly grounded in the statute's text, history, and longstanding judicial precedent. For more than 100 years, the Supreme Court has stated repeatedly that the fraud covered by the statute reaches any conspiracy for the purpose of impairing, obstructing, or defeating the lawful function of any department of government, and that this branch of liability is distinct from money or property limitations and other areas of fraud. It has long been established that statutory language is not confined to fraud, as that term has been defined in common law. It reaches any conspiracy for the purpose of impairing, obstructing, or defeating the lawful function of any department of government. Federal prosecutor upholding prosecution of a federal prosecutor for conspiring to receive bribes to influence his official duties. No financial fraud against the United States alleged. The indictment charges that the United States was defrauded by depriving it of its lawful governmental functions by dishonest means. It is settled that this is a defrauding within the means of Section 37 of the Criminal Code. To conspire to defraud the United States also means to interfere with or obstruct one of its lawful governmental functions by deceit, craft, or trickery, or at least by means that are dishonest. It is not necessary that the government shall be subjected to property or pecuniary loss by the fraud, but only that its legitimate official action and purpose shall be defeated by misrepresentation, chicane, or the overreaching of those charged with carrying out the governmental intention. It is not essential that such a conspiracy shall contemplate a financial loss or that one shall result. The statute is broad enough in its terms to include any conspiracy for the purpose of impairing, obstructing, or defeating the lawful function of any department of government. Against the backdrop of that Supreme Court precedent, Congress has reenacted and indeed expanded the scope of the defraud clause, reflecting congressional ratification of the court's construction of it. Congress is presumed to be aware of an administrative or judicial interpretation of a statute and to adopt that interpretation when it reenacts a statute without charge. In 1948, for instance, when Congress codified the general conspiracy statute, where a defraud clause currently resides, it was already settled that defrauding the United States by depriving it of its lawful governmental functions by dishonest means is a defrauding within the meaning of the defraud clause. And at that time, Congress added the words, or any agency thereof, in the defraud clause after United States. The House report from the Judiciary Committee accompanying the pertinent bill specifically stated that the amendment was designed to reflect the Constitution placed upon by the courts. The construction placed upon the courts. And it has consistently been the department's position in litigation that the defraud clause prescribes conspiracies to obstruct a lawful function of the federal government through deceit. Stating petitioner's content that defraud clause is limited to money and property schemes is inconsistent with over a century of Supreme Court precedent. Stating defraud clause is not unconstitutionally vague, in part because of the Supreme Court's longstanding interpretation that interference or obstruction must be by deceit or dishonest means. Explains why. Accordingly, the office concluded that Mr. Trump's conduct fell within the scope of Section 371, given the statute's longstanding, congressionally ratified construction and its historic use by the Justice Department. The office also recognized various limiting principles in the application of Section 371 that separate Mr. Trump's conduct from mere hardscrabble politics. A defraud clause violation, as honed by years of judicial decisions, including repeated applications by the Supreme Court, requires not only an agreement among co-conspirators, but identification of a specific function of the federal government. The intent to obstruct that function through deceit and an overt act. First, a defraud. Man. Sorry, this is taking me a while. In exchange for undisclosed campaign contributions and legal fees, congressmen conspired to defeat the lawful functions of the Department of Justice by urging dismissal of pending indictments. First, a defraud clause conspiracy must be targeted at a lawful function of the United States or any agency thereof. The unlawful agreement to attempt to use the CIA to interfere with the investigation of the Watergate break-in was thus fairly charged in count 1 of the indictment as one of the means by which the defendants intended to accomplish one of the principal objects of their conspiracy, defrauding the United States of its right to have its officials and agencies transact their business honestly, impartially, and free from corruption or undue influence or obstruction. In contrast, a conspiracy targeted at a private party or at a state or local government does not suffice, even if the entity receives federal funds or serves as an intermediary performing official functions on behalf of the federal government. Second, obstruction of the governmental function must be a purpose or object of the conspiracy and not merely a foreseeable consequence of the conspiratorial scheme. Thus, for example, financial crimes do not automatically become federal conspiracies to defraud the IRS, simply because the crime may have foreseeable tax implications. And this requirement means that the conspiracy must be aimed at defeating and obstructing the government function rather than simply participating in it. Third, the defraud clause is limited only to wrongs done by deceit, craft, or trickery, at least by the means that are dishonest. Fourth, the overt act requirement provides any limitation, the function of which is to manifest that the conspiracy is at work and is neither a project still resting solely in the minds of the conspirators nor fully completed operation no longer in existence. Finally, while at court in the District of Columbia has stated that materiality is not an element of a defraud clause conspiracy, the office was prepared to prove the materiality of Mr. Trump's deceptive statements and to offer a materiality instruction as another limitation on the scope of Section 371. Under that limitation, even conspirators who make knowingly false statements with an obstructive intent will not violate the defraud clause unless their statements are material. All of these requirements for establishing a conspiracy to defraud under Section 371 taken collectively ensure that common political conduct or political speech does not fall within the scope of the defraud clause. The evidence collected during the investigation met this requirement as Mr. Trump's conduct. Obstruction and conspiracy to obstruct. The federal statute prohibiting obstruction of an official proceeding makes it a crime to corruptly alter, destroy, mutilate, or conceal a record, document, or other object, or attempt to do so, with the intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in the official proceeding, otherwise obstruct, influence, or impede any official proceeding or attempt to do so. A separate provision defines the term official proceeding to include a proceeding before Congress. In Fisher versus the United States, deciding during the pendency of Mr. Trump's immunity appeal, the Supreme Court clarified the scope of an obstruction offense under Section 1512, holding that the statute applies only when the defendant impairs or attempts to impair the availability or integrity for use in an official proceeding of records, documents, objects, or other things used in the proceeding. In language that applies directly to the allegations in the superseding indictment, the Supreme Court explained that Section 1512 criminal prohibition includes creating false evidence before seeking the original indictment, which, like the superseding indictment, alleged that one component of Mr. Trump's and his co-conspirators' obstruction involved replacing valid elector certificates from the contested states with false ones they had manufactured. The office anticipated the possibility of such a result in Fisher and confirmed that the evidence would prove Mr. Trump's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, even under a narrow interpretation of Section 1512. In construing Section 1512 to reach impairing or attempting to impair the integrity of availability records, documents, or other objects through creating false evidence, the Supreme Court cited in United States v. Reich, in which a defendant was convicted under Section 1512 after he forged a court order and sent it to an opposing party, intending to cause that party to withdraw a mandamus petition then pending before an appellate court. Just as the defendant in Reich violated Section 1512 by injecting a false order into ongoing litigation to which he was party, the evidence showed that the co-conspirators created fraudulent electoral certificates that they intended to introduce into the congressional certification proceeding on January 6th to obstruct it. The office was also prepared to prove that Mr. Trump willfully caused his supporters to obstruct and attempt to obstruct the proceeding by summoning them to Washington, D.C., and then directing them to march to the Capitol to cause the vice president and legislatures to reject the legitimate certificates and instead rely on the fraudulent electoral certificates. Making a defendant criminally liable for willfully causing an act to be done which, if directly performed by him or another, would be a federal offense. Upholding a conviction for willfully causing a violation, the Supreme Court's opinion in Fisher, therefore, did not undermine the viability of Section 1512 counts. Much of the evidence that supports the Section 371 conspiracy to defraud likewise proves that Mr. Trump and co-conspirators violated Section 1512K and Section 1512C2. To demonstrate a violation of Section 1512C2 following Fisher, the government must prove the defendant obstructed, influenced, or impeded an official proceeding or attempted to do so. In the course of doing so, the defendant committed or attempted to commit an act that impaired the integrity or rendered unavailable records, documents, objects, or other things for the use in the official proceeding. The defendant intended to impair the integrity or render unavailable such records, documents, objects, or other things for use in the official proceeding, and the defendant acted corruptly. United States v. Bays describes elements required to establish a violation of Section 1512C2. Following Fisher, Mr. Trump's conduct establishes each of these elements beyond a reasonable doubt. The congressional certification proceeding was an official proceeding for purposes of Section 1512, as every district court judge in the District of Columbia to have considered this question has concluded. See United States v. Bingert, and as the D.C. Circuit has agreed, see Fisher, vacated and remanded on other grounds. The evidence described above supporting the Section 371 charge also establishes Mr. Trump's knowingly obstructive conduct, and as described above, Mr. Trump willfully caused others to attempt to obstruct the certification proceeding on January 6th. Finally, the government was prepared to prove Mr. Trump's corrupt intent under any definition beyond a reasonable doubt. To act corruptly means acting dishonestly, intending the use of unlawful means, violating a legal duty, or seeking to cause someone else to violate a legal duty, or seeking an unlawful or improper benefit or advantage. Acting corruptly also means acting with consciousness of wrongdoing. Mr. Trump and co-conspirators used deceptive and dishonest means. He intended the use of independently criminal means to obstruct the congressional certification proceeding. He and co-conspirators plainly sought to cause state and federal officials to violate a legal duty, and Mr. Trump acted with an intent to procure an unlawful benefit, either for oneself or for some other person. Most basically, Mr. Trump sought unlawfully to secure a professional advantage, the presidency, to which he was not lawfully entitled. This is another charge that we're covering, conspiracy against rights. Give me one moment, and we'll continue. Section 241 makes it unlawful for two or more persons to conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States. A violation of Section 241 requires proof of three elements. Mr. Trump entered into a conspiracy to willfully injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate a person in the United States in the exercise or enjoyment of a right secured by the Constitution or federal law. Mr. Trump's conduct meets each element. The right to vote for president based on the determination by state legislatures to appoint electors based on their constituents' votes is fundamental. The right to vote is the right to participate in an electoral process that is necessarily structured to maintain the integrity of the democratic system. Section 241 prohibits interference with a voter's right to cast a ballot for his or her preferred candidate and prohibits interference with the right of voters to have their votes free from dilution by unlawfully procured votes. It is right rooted in the principles of accountability to and consent by the governed, which has distinguished this nation from its founding. As the Supreme Court has recognized, the right to vote freely for the candidate of one's choice is of the essence of a democratic society, and any restrictions on that right strike at the heart of representative government. Voting is regarded as a fundamental political right because it is preservative of all rights. No right is more precious in a free country than that of having a voice in the election of those who make the laws under which, as good citizens, we must live. Other rights, even the most basic, are illusionary. Of the right to vote is undermined. Mr. Trump acknowledged that voting in a presidential election is a fundamental right under the Constitution. C. ECF number 163 at 23, arguing that urging states or Congress to use their power to select or to count electors does not affect the fundamental right to vote because it does not arbitrarily value one person's vote over that of another or restrict the exercise of that right. Rather, it encourages the states and Congress to exercise their constitutional prerogatives a certain way. Indeed, given that all states have made the popular vote an integral means of appointing electors, the right to vote in a presidential election is among the most precious federal rights protected by the Constitution. When a state makes a primary election an integral part of the procedure for the popular choice of a congressman, it becomes a right established and guaranteed by the uniquely important national interest in a presidential election because the president represents all the voters in the nation. This history of the Section 241 offense, this history of the Section 241 offense with which Mr. Trump was charged, along with courts universal, and long-standing recognition of the voting rights protected by that statute confirm that protecting that the right to vote is critical to the existence of the right. Section 241's predecessor statute was passed as part of the Enforcement Act of 1870, a Reconstruction-era law to address the continual denial of rights to black citizens, sometimes accompanied by violent assaults. That act sought to combat widespread anti-Reconstruction violence, which included acts of terror aimed at disenfranchising black voters. The same year as the act's passage, Congress established the U.S. Department of Justice, and the department zealously pursued its mission to enforce voting rights in the Reconstruction era. Through the application and interpretation of Section 241 and its predecessor statute, courts have repeatedly underscored the importance of the right to vote. Courts have held that the right encompasses the ability to cast a vote, protecting right of an emancipated person to vote and to have that vote counted. We regard it as equally unquestionable that the right to have one's vote counted is as open to protection by Congress as the right to put a ballot in a box. They have further confirmed that one's vote cannot lawfully be denied, destroyed, or diluted. Holding that Section's 241 predecessor statute applied to conspiracies to prevent the official counting of ballots in a primary election, Section 241 applies to prohibit conspiracies to dilute legitimate votes by stuffing the ballot box. Board of Elections inspectors charged with falsely tabulating ballots to favor certain candidates, convictions reversed on separate jury grounds. Defendants charged for casting and causing to be cast false and forged ballots, causing an incorrect vote tally, and using unqualified individuals to impersonate lawful voters. Mr. Trump and co-conspirators sought to deprive, that is, injure or oppress citizens of their constitutional right to their presidential election votes counted. The words injure or oppress in Section 241 are not used in any technical sense, but cover a variety of conduct intended to prevent, harm, inhibit, hinder, frustrate, obstruct, or interfere with the free exercise and enjoyment of a right. Although they were not in a back room altering the vote tallies in a local election or stuffing falsified ballots into ballot boxes, and as alleged in prior cases charged under this statute, Mr. Trump and co-conspirators nonetheless sought the same result: to effectively cast aside legitimate votes in a manner that would be have deprived citizens of their right to vote and have their votes counted. As co-conspirator 1 admitted, their primary objective was to just flat out change the vote, deduct the number of votes from declare those votes. 300,000 votes in Philadelphia illegal or unlawful. Reduce the number by 300,000. Mr. Trump attempted to carry out this objective in multiple ways. He urged state officials to disregard the legitimate majority of votes for Mr. Biden, and pressured and threatened Georgia's Secretary of State to find more than 11,000 votes to dilute Mr. Biden's vote count in the state. And he urged Mr. Pence to discard the legitimate electoral certificates that reflected millions of citizens' votes in the targeted states. The evidence collected showed that Mr. Trump targeted this voting right with precision. He centered his false claims of election fraud on select states or cities and counties within those states with large numbers of voters who had not chosen to re-elect him. Defenses. Before presenting the original indictment to the grand jury, the office considered Mr. Trump's potential defenses to these charges, including a good faith defense, an advice of counsel defense, and constitutional defenses. The office concluded that each of the defenses was legally or factually flawed and thus would not prevail. First, it was expected that Mr. Trump would argue that he acted in good faith when he sought to stop the transfer of presidential power because he genuinely believed that the outcome-determinative fraud had undermined the election's integrity and caused him to lose. As set forth above in Section 2A, the office developed strong proof that Mr. Trump knew that his election fraud claims were false. For example, Mr. Trump made persistent claims of a large number of dead voters in Georgia, including his speech at the Ellipse on January 6, even though his senior campaign advisor and Georgia's Secretary of State had told him that the claims were untrue. He spread lies, including his Ellipse speech of sinister fraudulent vote dumps in Michigan, even after Michigan Senate Majority Leader told him that nothing suspicious had occurred, and Mr. Trump repeatedly made probably false allegations about fraud in Pennsylvania, despite having been told by the chairman of the state of the Republican Party that the vote count was occurring as expected. Even if Mr. Trump maintained that he sincerely believed he won the election, a conclusion unsupported by the evidence collected in the investigation, it would not provide a defense to the Section 371 charge. A defendant may not use deceit to obstruct a government function, even if he believes the function itself to be unconstitutional, because a claim of unconstitutionality would not be heard to excuse a voluntary, deliberate, and calculated course of fraud and deceit. One who elects such a course as a means of self-help may not escape the consequences by urging that his conduct be excused because the statute which he sought to evade is unconstitutional. There are appropriate and inappropriate ways to challenge perceived illegalities, just as the president of a company may be guilty of fraud for using knowingly false statements of fact to defraud investors if he subjectively believes that his company will eventually succeed. Mr. Trump could be convicted of using deceit to obstruct government function by which the results of the presidential election are collected, counted, and certified, even if he established that he subjectively believed that he had reason to do so because of his claims that the election was rigged. It bears emphasis that Mr. Trump's knowing deceit was pervasive throughout the charged conspiracies. This was not a case in which Mr. Trump merely misstated a fact or two in a handful of isolated instances. On a repeated basis, he and co-conspirators used specific and knowingly false claims of election fraud in his calls and meetings with state officials in an effort to induce them to overturn the results of the election in their states. To his own vice president, to induce Mr. Pence to violate his duty during the congressional certification proceeding. And on January 6, as a call to action to the angered crowd he had gathered at the Ellipse and sent to the Capitol to disrupt the certification proceeding. Mr. Trump and co-conspirators used other forms of deceit as well, including when they falsely represented that the fraudulent electoral votes would be used only if Mr. Trump prevailed in pending contests in their states, and when they caused the fraudulent electors to falsely swear that they were duly certified and send those false certifications to Congress. Regardless of any claim that Mr. Trump subjectively believed the outcome of the election was unfair or rigged, the office concluded that these knowingly deceitful statements and acts would overcome any good faith defense. The office also expected that Mr. Trump might claim that his consultation with attorneys, several of whom were co-conspirators, should negate a finding that he acted with a criminal state of mind. In pretrial litigation, the court granted the government's motion that Mr. Trump should be required to declare whether he intended to employ such a defense, and, if he did, to produce the discovery required by the intended waiver of Mr. Trump's attorney-client privilege. A defendant's claim that he relied in good faith on his attorney's advice is not an affirmative defense that defeats liability even if the jury accepts the government's allegations as true, but functions instead as evidence that, if believed, can raise a reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors about whether the government has proved the required element of the offense that the defendant had an unlawful intent. Under D.C. Circuit law, an advice of counsel defense consists of two elements. The defendant relied in good faith on the counsel's advice that his course of conduct was legal, and made full disclosure of all material facts to his attorney before receiving the advice at issue. The office concluded that if Mr. Trump chose to raise such a defense, it would fail because an advice of counsel defense is not available, where counsel acts as an accomplice to the crime. The evidence showed that the central attorneys on whom Mr. Trump may have relied for such a defense, such as co-conspirator 1 or co-conspirator 2, were partners in a venture, with the result that any advice of counsel defense necessarily would fail. A criminal lawyer has no license to act as a lawyer criminal. Co-conspirator 1 assisted Mr. Trump in using knowingly false claims of election fraud in furtherance of the charged conspiracies. At press conferences, at hearings before legislatures in the targeted states, and directly with officials in the targeted states, co-conspirator 1 made a wide range of specific, though ever-changing, false claims of election fraud. Co-conspirator 1 continued to do so after his lies were publicly or directly debunked. Co-conspirator 1's involvement spanned from his insistence that Mr. Trump declare victory on election night to voicemails. That co-conspirator 1 left for senators on the night of January 6th, using false claims of election fraud to ask that the legislatures further delay the certification. Co-conspirator 2 was instrumental in Mr. Trump's efforts to organize his electors to cast fraudulent votes and send them to vice president, and then to pressure the vice president to use the fraudulent electoral certificates to overturn the election results. Throughout his involvement in Mr. Trump's conspiracies, co-conspirator 2 conceded privately to other attorneys, both private attorneys and those responsible for advising Mr. Trump and the vice president, that his plans violated federal law and would not withstand scrutiny in court. Furthermore, Mr. Trump could not have succeeded in showing that he relied in good faith on legal advice from these attorneys. The evidence showed that Mr. Trump was not looking for co-conspirator 1 or co-conspirator 2 for legal advice. Instead, Mr. Trump was the head of a conspiracy who sought legal cover from his co-conspirators. As co-conspirator 1 acted repeatedly in furtherance of the conspiracies, multiple advisors to Mr. Trump warned him that co-conspirator 1 would not successfully challenge the election results and was not acting in Mr. Trump's best interest. Mr. Trump ignored them all because he was not relying on co-conspirator 1 as an attorney. Similarly, co-conspirator 2's willingness to advocate for actions that he knew and even privately conceded were unlawful demonstrates that both he and Mr. Trump understood his role was not that of an attorney offering legal advice on which Mr. Trump was acting. For instance, in a lawsuit in Georgia, co-conspirator 2 filed a false certification by Mr. Trump after having written to other attorneys in an email that both he and Mr. Trump knew some of the allegations incorporated in the filing were inaccurate. And co-conspirator 2's decision to advocate to the Vice President's counsel and Chief of Staff on January 5, 2021, that the Vice President should unlawfully reject legitimate electoral certificates, an act that co-conspirator 2 had previously recognized was not supported by the Constitution or federal law, was a sharp reversal from his position just one day earlier and happened only because Mr. Trump had clearly made that it was his preferred strategy. The office is otherwise confident that it would be able to demonstrate, with all respect to all attorneys, Mr. Trump could not meet the elements of the defense, such as the requirement that he make full disclosure to any attorneys of all relevant facts and then rely faithfully on their advice. Finally, the office anticipated that Mr. Trump would claim that his conduct was protected by the First Amendment. As the district court recognized, the First Amendment embodies our profound national commitment to the free exchange of ideas, and it bars the government from restricting expression because of its message, its ideas, its subject matter, or its content. At the same time, it is well established that the First Amendment does not protect speech that is used as an instrument of a crime. Many long-established criminal laws permissibly criminalize speech that is intending to induce or commence illegal activities, such as fraud, bribery, perjury, extortion, threats, incitement, solicitation, and blackmail. Prosecutions for conspiring, directing, and aiding and abetting do not run afoul of the Constitution when those offenses are carried out through speech. Consistent with that precedent, the original and superseding indictments recognized that Mr. Trump had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the 2020 presidential election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election that he had won. They charged Mr. Trump, however, with using knowingly false statements to defeat a government function, injure the right to vote, and obstruct an official proceeding. That is, he made dozens of specific claims that there had been substantial fraud in certain states, such as that large number of dead, non-resident, non-citizen, or otherwise ineligible voters had cast ballots, or the voting machines had changed votes for the defendant to votes for Biden. Those were factual claims that were verifiably false, and Mr. Trump knew that they were false. Mr. Trump then used those lies as instruments of his 4 criminal offenses because he used those knowingly false statements regarding specific facts to commit the crimes charged in the superseding indictment. They were not protected by the First Amendment, including fraud in the list of well-defined and narrowly limited classes of speech, the prevention and punishment of which have never been thought to raise any constitutional problem. Explaining that while falsity alone may not suffice to bring the speech outside the First Amendment permits criminal laws that prescribe knowing or reckless falsehoods in connection with some other legally cognizable harm, including protecting the integrity of government processes. In pretrial motions, Mr. Trump moved to dismiss the original indictment based on the First Amendment. The office filed an opposition brief and at the district court denied the motion, finding that indictment properly alleges defendant's statements were made in furtherance of criminal scheme. As the court explained, Mr. Trump was not being prosecuted for his view on political dispute. He was being prosecuted for acts constituting criminal conspiracy and obstruction of the electoral process, and the fact that his alleged criminal conduct involved speech does not render the indictment unconstitutional, because he was not being prosecuted simply for making false statements, but rather for knowingly making false statements in furtherance of a criminal conspiracy and obstructing the electoral process. There was no danger of a slippery slope in which inadvertent false statements alone are alleged to be the basis for criminal prosecution. Other charges. The office considered but ultimately opted against bringing other charges. One potential charge, sometimes referred to as the Insurrection Act, which provides that whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. It originated during the Civil War as part of the Second Confiscation Act of 1862. Cases interpreting Section 2383 are scarce and arose in contexts that provided little guidance regarding its potential application in this case. Construing the original version of the act to encompass treason, consisting of arming a vessel to commit hostilities against the United States vessels in the context of the rebellion by the Confederate States. Grand jury charged that insurrection is arising against civil or political authority and requires such a number of persons as would constitute a general uprising in that particular locality. In the context of offense of obstructing the mails, it does not appear that any defendant has been charged with violating the statute in more than 100 years. To establish a violation of Section 2383, the officer would first have had to prove that the violence at the Capitol on January 6 constituted an insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, and then prove that Mr. Trump incited or assisted the insurrection, or gave aid or comfort thereto. Courts have found or described the attack on the Capitol as an insurrection. The Colorado Supreme Court found that Mr. Trump engaged in an insurrection as that term is used in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Federal courts in the District of Columbia have also used the term insurrection to describe the attack on the Capitol, but did so in cases where there was no criminal charge under Section 2383. As this court and other courts in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia have stated previously, what occurred on January 6, 2021 was in fact an insurrection and involved insurrectionists, and therefore the terms to which defendants object are accurate descriptors. What occurred on January 6 was in fact a riot and an insurrection. and it did in fact involve a mob, using the term insurrection in a case that did not involve Section 2383. These cases, however, did not require the courts to resolve the issue of how to define insurrection for purposes of Section 2383, or apply that definition to the conduct of criminal defendant in the context of January 6th. The office recognized why courts described the attack on the Capitol as an insurrection, but it was also aware of the litigation risk that would be presented by employing this long-term dormant statute. As to the first element under Section 2383, proving an insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, the cases the office reviewed provided no guidance on what proof would be required to establish an insurrection or to distinguish an insurrection from a riot. Generally speaking, an insurrection is a rising against civil or political authority, the open and active opposition of a number of persons to the execution of law in a city or state. An act or instance of revolting against a civil authority or an established government. The act or an instance of open revolt against a civil authority or constituted government. The action of rising in arms or open resistance against established authority or governmental restraint. Some sources distinguish an insurrection from a rout, riot, or offense connected with mob violence by the fact that an insurrection there is an organized and armed uprising against an authority or operations of government, while crimes growing out of a mob violence. However serious they may be, and however numerous the participants, are simply unlawful acts and disturbance of the peace which do not threaten the stability of the government or the existence of political society. Mr. Trump's argument that an insurrection is more than a riot but less than a rebellion, and agreeing that an insurrection falls along a spectrum of related conduct. In case law interpreting insurrection in another context, one court has observed that an insurrection typically involves overthrowing a sitting government rather than maintaining power, which could pose another challenge to proving beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Trump's conduct on January 6th qualified as an insurrection, given that he was the sitting president at that time. In every case, over the course of over 60 years, to find the existence of an insurrection within the meaning of an insurance policy, the insurrection has occurred against, not by, the established effective and de facto government. The district court held that the word insurrection means a violent uprising by a group or movement acting for the specific purpose of overthrowing the constituted government and seizing its powers. Puerto Rican extremists had a maximum objective to overthrow of the insular government on the island. That group's uprising would constitute insurrection. Case law. A Russian-backed separatist group's attack on a plane in service of overthrowing the current government in eastern Ukraine was an insurrectionary act. Applying to VIA in finding that where individuals outside of the Liberian government led their respective armies in a violent uprising against the Liberian government, damaged properties fell within an insurance contract's insurrection clause. The office did not find any case in which the criminal defendant was charged with insurrection for acting within the government to maintain power, as opposed to overthrowing it or thwarting it from the outside. Applying Section 2383 in this way would have been a first, which further weighed against charging it, given the other available charges, even if there were reasonable arguments that it might apply. As to the second element under 2383, there does not appear to have been ever been a prosecution under the statute for inciting, assisting, or giving aid or comfort to rebellion or insurrection. The few relevant cases that exist appear to be based on defendant directly engaging in rebellion or insurrection, but the office's proof did not include evidence that Mr. Trump directly engaged in insurrection himself. Thus, however strong the proof that he incited or gave aid and comfort to those who attacked the Capitol, application of those theories of liability would also have been a first. The likelihood of conviction under the federal incitement to insurrection statute case law is fraught with uncertainty because no federal court has interpreted it. The office determined that there was reasonable arguments to be made that Mr. Trump's lip speech incited the violence at the Capitol on January 6 and could satisfy the Supreme Court standard for incitement under Brandenburg v. Ohio, holding that the First Amendment does not protect advocacy directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action and likely to incite or produce such action. particularly when the speech is viewed in the context of Mr. Trump's lengthy and deceitful voter fraud narrative that came before it. For example, the evidence established that the violence was foreseeable to Mr. Trump, that he caused it, that it was beneficial to his plan to interfere with decertification, and that when it occurred, he made a conscious choice not to stop it and instead leverage it for more delay. But the office did not develop direct evidence, such as explicit admission or communication with co-conspirators, of Mr. Trump's subjective intent to cause the full scope of the violence that occurred on January 6th. Therefore, in light of the other powerful charges available, and because the office recognized that the Brandenburg Standard is a rigorous one, case law speech delivered in passionate atmosphere that referenced possibility that necks would be broken and violators of boycott would be disciplined, did not satisfy Brandenburg Standard. Reversing conviction where Ku Klux Klan leaders threatened revengeance for suppression of white race, it concluded that pursuance and incitement to insurrection charge was unnecessary. By comparison, the statutes that the office did charge had been interpreted and analyzed in various contexts over many years. The office had a solid basis for sections 371, 1512, and 241 to address the conduct presented in this case, and it concluded that introducing relatively untested legal theories surrounding Section 2383 would create unwarranted litigation risk. Importantly, the charges the office brought fully addressed Mr. Trump's criminal conduct, and pursuing a charge under Section 2383 would not have added to or otherwise strengthened the office's evidentiary presentation at trial. For all of these reasons, the office elected not to pursue charges under Section 2383. Co-conspirator liability. As described in factual recitation above, Mr. Trump was charged with participating in crimes with at least 6 co-conspirators, and the office's investigation uncovered evidence that some individuals shared criminal culpability with Mr. Trump. Following the original indictment on August 1st, 2023, the office continued to investigate whether any other participant in the conspiracy should be charged with crimes. In addition, the office referred to the United States Attorney General's office for further investigation evidence that investigative subject may have committed unrelated crimes. Before the department concluded that this case must be dismissed, the office had made a preliminary determination that the admissible evidence could justify seeking charges against certain co-conspirators. The office had also begun to evaluate how to proceed, including whether any potential charge cases should be joined with Mr. Trump's or brought separately. Because the office reached no final conclusions and did not seek indictments against anyone other than Trump, the head of criminal conspiracies and their intended beneficiary, this report does not elaborate further on the investigation and preliminary assessment of uncharged individuals. This report should not be read to allege that any particular person other than Mr. Trump committed a crime, nor should it be read to exonerate any particular person. Give me one moment, I'm going to get a drink. Go ahead and give me a like, comment. I'm reading out the Jack Smith report from last year. Stay tuned. I'll go ahead and look at some comments here real quick. Just want to see what's there. The principles of federal prosecution. As set forth above, the office concluded that Mr. Trump's conduct violated several federal criminal statutes and that admissible evidence would be sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction. Therefore, under the longstanding principles of federal prosecution, the office considered whether, 1, the prosecution would serve a substantial federal interest, Mr. Trump was subject to effective prosecution in another jurisdiction, or there existed an adequate non-criminal alternative prosecution. U.S. Department of Justice Justice Manual, such and such, as described below, multiple substantial federal interests were served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. He was not subject to effective prosecution in another jurisdiction, and there was no adequate non-criminal alternative to prosecution. The Supreme Court's decision on presidential immunity, handed down after the initial decision to prosecute and analyze below in Section 5, did not alter the office's view that the principles of federal prosecution compelled prosecuting Mr. Trump. Although that decision prevented use of certain evidence uncovered regarding Mr. Trump's misuse of presidential power, he also engaged in non-immune criminal conduct that is set forth in the superseding indictment. Accordingly, This section discusses only evidence that was not immunized, either because it involved Mr. Trump's private conduct or because the office would have rebutted any presumption of immunity. Prosecuting Mr. Trump served multiple substantial federal interests. Mr. Trump's prosecution served multiple federal interests, including the federal interest in the integrity of the United States process for collecting, counting, and certifying presidential elections, and in a peaceful and orderly transition of presidential power. The presidential interest in ensuring that every citizen's vote is counted, the federal interest in protecting public officials and government workers from violence, and the federal interest in the fair and even-handed enforcement of the law. All of these federal interests, which are rooted in the law, the Constitution, and our basic democratic values, are substantial and command protection from Mr. Trump's criminal design to subvert them. The substantial federal interest in protecting the integrity of the electoral process and the peaceful transfer of power was served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. As set forth above, the investigation revealed that Mr. Trump and others conspired to use false claims of election fraud to attempt to disrupt the United States electoral process and obstruct the congressional certification of the 2020 presidential election results. Prosecution for that conduct was vindicated, abdicating federal interests in protecting the electoral process and the previously unbroken tradition before Mr. Trump's charged conduct of a peaceful transition of presidential power from one administration to the next. These federal interests are fundamental to our system of government, favoring no particular administration or political party. Indeed, electoral processes like selecting the president are necessarily structured to maintain the integrity of the democratic system, preserving the integrity of the electoral process, and preventing corruption, are interests of the highest importance. The office was cognizant of Mr. Trump's free speech rights during the investigation and would not have brought a prosecution if the evidence indicated he had engaged in mere political exaggeration or rough and tumble politics. More case law. In the enforcement of laws that protect our national integrity and existence, we should prosecute any and every act of violation, but only overt acts, not the expression of opinion or activities such as holding of meetings, petitioning of Congress, or dissemination of news or opinions. As set forth in the original and superseding indictments, Mr. Trump had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had won. He also had lawful recourse to challenge the election results, including through lawsuits, recounts, and audits. In fact, Mr. Trump and his allies vigorously pursued these methods of contesting the election results, but they were unsuccessful. After Election Day, Mr. Trump or his campaign were plaintiffs or interveners in at least 16 lawsuits seeking to change the outcome of the election, and Mr. Trump's supporters filed dozens of other lawsuits. But all of these failed to change the outcome in any state. Mr. Trump pursued recounts in only 2 states, a statewide machine recount in Georgia and a recount in Wisconsin's Milwaukee and Dane counties, and both served only to confirm the previously reported results. In Wisconsin, the recounted increased Mr. Trump's margin of loss. Following public requests, Secretaries of State in Georgia and Michigan ordered additional audits and recounts. In Georgia, a statewide hand recount and an audit in Cobb County, and in Michigan, a statewide audit and a hand recount in Antrim County, where Mr. Trump seized on the claims of a clerk's temporary clerical error, but all merely confirmed previously reported results. The conduct of Mr. Trump and co-conspirators, however, went well beyond speaking their minds or contesting the election results through our legal system. Instead, Mr. Trump targeted a key federal government function, the process by which the United States collects, counts, and certifies the results of the presidential election, and sought to obstruct or defeat it through fraud and deceit. He did so using knowingly false claims of election fraud to attempt to induce state officials to reject citizens' votes and instead appoint Mr. Trump's electors. When he deceived his electors and caused them to falsify electoral certificates and submit them to Congress, when he attempted to enlist Mr. Pence with false claims of election fraud and pressure, and when he used and attempted to leverage an angry crowd of his supporters fueled by Mr. Trump's lies to stop the certification proceeding. Mr. Trump did this in contravention of the framers' intent to prevent a sitting president from perpetuating himself in power. In Free Governments, Benjamin Franklin explained the rulers are the servants and the people their superiors and sovereigns. Although the framers recognized the necessity of an energetic executive, they justified and checked his power by ensuring that he always retained a due dependence on the people. As the Supreme Court noted in Trump, the president plays no direct role in the process of appointing electors, nor does he have the authority to control the state officials who do. And the framers, wary of cabal, intrigue, and corruption, specifically excluded from services as electors all those who from situation might be suspected of too great devotion to the president in office. Accordingly, Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution provides that no senator or representative or person holding an office of trust or profit under the United States shall be appointed an elector. The considerable federal interest in protecting the integrity of the United States electoral process weighed in favor of proceeding with Mr. Trump's prosecution. So too did the federal interest in defending from future harm the United States' exceptional tradition of peaceful transitions of presidential power. That tradition was initiated by George Washington when he announced in his September 1796 farewell address that he would decline to seek a third term, followed by John Adams when he relinquished the power of the presidency to his political rival, Thomas Jefferson, after the election of 1800, and continued by every sitting president until 2020. Even though the turbulent Civil War and Reconstruction eras, and Congress and the courts have also recognized the federal interest in orderly presidential transitions. Legislation to promote the orderly transfer of executive power, because any disruption occasioned by the transfer of the executive power could produce results detrimental to the safety and well-being of the United States and its people. Recognizing Congress's unique legislative need for documents directly relevant to the inquiry and to an attack on the legislative branch and its constitutional role in the peaceful transfer of power. I'm reading case law, When assessing various serious nature and circumstances of January 6 related offenses, court observed that they involved, among others, an alleged conspiracy to obstruct the certification of the electoral vote, and thus to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power, one of our nation's crown jewels. In his first inaugural address, President Ronald Reagan remarked on the country's tradition of a peaceful transition of presidential power. To a few of us here today, this is a solemn and most momentous occasion. And yet, in the history of our nation, it is a commonplace occurrence. The orderly transfer of authority as called for in the Constitution routinely takes place, as it has for almost 2 centuries, and few of us stop to think how unique we really are. In the eyes of many in the world, this every 4-year ceremony we accept as normal is nothing less than a miracle. Inaugural Address, 1981. In connection with preserving that tradition, vice presidents have presided over the certification of their own election losses. In 1961, then Vice President Richard Nixon fulfilled his role as President of the Senate at the January 6th certification proceeding. Announced that John F. Kennedy had won the presidency, and so announcing his own defeat, Nixon stated, "This is the first time in 100 years that a candidate for the presidency announced the result of an election in which he was defeated and announced the victory of his opponent. I do not think we could have a more striking and eloquent example of the stability of our constitutional system and of the proud tradition of the American people of developing, respecting, and honoring institutions of self-government." And in 2001, after a hard-fought legal dispute over the 2000 presidential election, Vice President Al Gore similarly presided over the certification of his opponent, George W. Bush, as president-elect, protecting the well-established American tradition of a peaceful transfer of power weighed in favor of prosecution. The substantial federal interest in counting every citizen's vote was served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. Few federal interests are stronger in our representative democracy than that of protecting every eligible citizen's right to vote and to have that vote counted. The evidence establishes that in contravention of that right, Mr. Trump urged state officials to disregard the legitimate majority of votes for Mr. Biden, and instead appoint Mr. Trump's electors, pressured and threatened Georgia's Secretary of State to find more than 11,000 votes, to dilute the legitimate vote count and allow Mr. Trump to be declared the winner of the state, and urged Mr. Pence to discard the legitimate electoral certificates that reflected millions of citizens' votes in the targeted states. An additional factor meriting Mr. Trump's prosecution, therefore, was the need to vindicate and protect the voting rights of these and all future voters. The strength of the federal interest in prosecuting the right to vote is plain from the history of suffrage in America, as chronicled in the Constitution, which has been amended not fewer than 5 times to extend and protect the franchise for all adult citizens regardless of race, sex, age, and education. Case law providing that if a state failed to ensure all eligible citizens the right to vote, the state's proportional representation would be reduced. Case law, the right to vote shall not be denied or abridged on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Amendment 19, same on the account of sex. Amendment 24, same by reason of failure to pay any poll tax. Amendment 26, same for citizens who are 18 years of age or older, and a consistent line of court decisions maintaining that suffrage can neither be denied outright nor destroyed by alterations of ballots. The strength of the federal interest is further reflected by the history of the Section 241 offense with which Mr. Trump was charged, and as set forth in Section 2C above by courts' universal and longstanding recognition of the right protected by that statute in attempting to disenfranchise voters who did not choose to reelect him. Trump targeted a bedrock fundamental right that the government has a strong interest in protecting. The substantial federal interest in protecting election officials and other government officials from violence was served by Mr. Trump's prosecution. Another federal interest that merited Mr. Trump's prosecution was addressing his resort throughout the charged criminal conspiracies to threats and encouragement of violence against his perceived opponents. Consistently, when elected officials refused to take improper actions that Mr. Trump urged, like discarding legitimate votes or appointing fraudulent electors, Mr. Trump attacked them publicly on Twitter, a social media application on which he had more than 80 million followers. Give me one moment. Go ahead and give this a like, subscribe. Let me know in the comments section what you think so far. I'm just reading Jack Smith's report and continuing on. Inevitably, threats and intimidation to these officials followed. For instance, as Mr. Trump targeted a Philadelphia city commissioner in a tweet criticizing the commissioner for stating that there was no evidence of widespread election fraud in Philadelphia. Threats against the commissioner grew more targeted, more detailed, and more graphic. These threats extended to include highly personal information like the names and ages of the commissioner's family members as well as photos or the address of his home. Fulton County, Georgia, election officials similarly reported receiving threats, including death threats, following Mr. Trump's false public accusations against Fulton County election workers. Mr. Trump also targeted private citizens who served as election workers. He took particular aim at a mother and daughter who worked at Atlanta's State Farm Arena counting ballots on Election Day. He and his co-conspirators spread pernicious false claims that these election workers had committed misconduct. Although the lies were promptly and publicly debunked, Mr. Trump continued to repeat them, and the election workers were subjected to vile threats. As one of the women explained, when someone as powerful as the President of the United States eggs on a mob, that mob will come. They came for us with their cruelty, their threats, their racism, and their hats. They haven't stopped even today. Mr. Trump persisted in publicly spreading false and harmful social media posts about the same election workers into 2023. In 2024, co-conspirator 1 conceded in a defamation lawsuit filed by the election workers that his statements about them were defamatory per se and false, and a jury awarded them damages of more than $145 million. Mr. Trump took aim at Mr. Pence when Mr. Pence repeatedly informed Mr. Trump that he could not, in good conscience, do as Mr. Trump asked. On January 6th, this included Mr. Trump's retributive targeting of Mr. Pence during his ellipse speech and the 2:24 p.m. tweet attacking Mr. Pence that Mr. Trump issued, even though he knew that the riot was ongoing at the Capitol. Taken together, these actions resulted in rioters at the Capitol on January 6, singling out Mr. Pence for their ire and chanting, "Where is Pence? Bring him out and hang Mike Pence." In addition to prompting these threats against the targets of Mr. Trump's criticism, Mr. Trump's words inspired his supporters to commit acts of physical violence. On January 6, Mr. Trump used his ellipse speech to direct his supporters to go to the Capitol and fight like hell. He explicitly licensed them not only not long after co-conspirator 1 had exhorted the crowd to engage in trial by combat, to operate under very different rules, because fraud was allegedly involved. And he told them they were not going to let it happen, urging them to stop the election certification proceeding that was about to begin. The people who took Mr. Trump at his word formed a massive crowd that broke onto restricted Capitol grounds and into the building, violently attacking law enforcement officers, protecting the Capitol and those inside. Officers have described being assaulted by rioters wielding bear spray, metal bats, and flagpoles and other improvised weapons. A Metropolitan Police Department commander recounted that the scene was a nonstop barrage of just strikes, with weapons and things being thrown and pepper spray and you name it, everything being hurled at these officers. You could hear them yelling. You could hear them, screams and moans and everything else. Multiple officers stated that they feared for their lives when among the rioters that day. One MPD officer put that fear at 100% from the moment he entered the crowd, and he explained that he thought he might die. You know you're getting pushed, kicked. You know people are throwing metal bats at you and all that stuff. I was like, yeah, this is it. A U.S. Capitol police officer similarly recalled thinking, I think I might die today. And in one instance, an MPD officer recounted that rioters dragged him into the crowd, where they beat and tased him while yelling things like, I got one, and kill him with his gun. On January 6, rioters assaulted at least 140 law enforcement officers that day, and at least 123 defendants have been charged with using a deadly or dangerous weapon or causing serious bodily injury to law enforcement. This violence took a lasting toll. In addition to the significant physical injuries inflicted that day, officers suffered unseen injuries, including depression and other forms of psychological trauma. Officers at the Capitol understood that if the rioters reached the lawmakers and other staff inside the building, violence would have been done to them as well. Only through the heroism of the law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol were lawmakers and their staff protected from harm. Many members of Congress feared for their lives once the rioters breached the Capitol building. Elected representatives, congressional staff, and members of the press hid in terror from the mob, in barricaded offices or unmarked rooms as rioters roamed the hallways. For instance, in detailing his efforts to evacuate a U.S. senator and her staff from an unmarked hiding spot, one U.S. Capitol police officer described the senator as afraid for her life, shaking, and she was scared. He added that the senator later relayed to him that what the rioters did on January 6th had scared and frightened everybody, and had put a lot of people's lives in danger. The violence of January 6th was foreseeable to Mr. Trump, who had remarked just the evening before that his supporters were angry, and who, to cheers of invade the Capitol building and take the Capitol, had told those supporters during his ellipse speech to show strength and to be strong. When he told them, we're not going to let it happen, the crowd chanted, fight for Trump. And when he warned his gathered supporters that if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, the crowd marched to the Capitol in response. Indeed, officials and advisors close to Trump recognized and voiced their concerns over his high potential for election-related violence. On January 4th, a senior advisor explicitly warned co-conspirator 2 that if Mr. Pence unilaterally rejected legitimate electoral votes, it would cause riots in the streets. Co-conspirator 2 relied that there had previously been points in the nation's history where violence was necessary to protect the republic. On January 5th, after Mr. Trump told Mr. Pence that he would have publicly criticized him, Mr. Pence's chief of staff was sufficiently concerned for Mr. Pence's safety that he alerted the head of the vice president's protective detail. And a counsel to the vice president issued a prescient warning to co-conspirator 2 the same day, when he warned that the co-conspirators' plans would result in a disastrous situation where the election might have to be decided in the streets. Indeed, as the riot at the Capitol unfolded on January 6th, the Vice President's counsel chided co-conspirator 2 that whipping large numbers of people into a frenzy over something with no chance of ever attaining legal force through actual process of law has led us to where we are. There is unquestionably a public interest in ensuring that elected officials and election workers can carry out their duties without fear of threats and retaliation. The right to vote is the cornerstone of our democracy, the right from which all other rights ultimately flow. For this vital right to be effective, election officials must be permitted to do their jobs, free from improper partisan influence, physical threats, or any other conduct designed to intimidate. Accordingly, the need to promote this federal interest weighed in favor of proceeding against Mr. Trump. There is a substantial federal interest in ensuring the even-handed administration of the law with respect to accountability for the events of January 6, 2021, and the office determined that the interest would not be satisfied absent Mr. Trump's prosecution for his role. Multiple district court judges have recognized Mr. Trump's role in the events of January 6. Court stating that the January 6 defendant was called to Washington, D.C. by an election official. He was prompted to walk to the Capitol by an elected official and telling defendant, "I think you were a pawn. You were a pawn in a game that was played and directed by people who should have known better." Court stating that incendiary statements at the Ellipse rally absolutely quite clearly and deliberately stoked the flames of fear and discontent and explicitly encouraged those at the rally to go to the Capitol and fight for one reason and one reason only, to make sure the certification did not happen. The events of January 6 involved a rather unprecedented confluence of events spurred by then President Trump and a number of his prominent allies who bear much responsibility for what occurred on that date. To date, more than 1,500 people have been criminally charged for their roles in the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. With that in mind, Mr. Trump's relative culpability weighed heavily in favor of charging him as the individual most responsible for what occurred at the Capitol on January 6th. Requiring prosecutors to assess the degree of the person's culpability in connection with the offense, both in the abstract and in comparison with any others involved in the offense. Rioters have cited Mr. Trump as the reason they traveled to Washington, D.C. and went to the Capitol that day. In the weeks before January 6, Mr. Trump issued several tweets calling his supporters to Washington, D.C. for his rally at the Ellipse, and they answered the call. In the days after Mr. Trump's December 19th tweet promising that the rally would be wild, for instance, Kelly Meggs, a member of the Oath Keepers group, who was later convicted of seditious conspiracy, among other charges, messaged associates that it's going to be wild. Trump wants us to make it wild. That's what he's saying. Meggs added, he called us all to the Capitol, and he wants us to make it wild. Rioter David Koontz, a member of the Three Percenters militia group who would later plead guilty to charges related to breaching the Capitol building, planned travel to Washington, D.C. on January 6th, in direct response to the December 19th tweet. Koontz later shared Trump's December 27 tweet, which told supporters, "See you in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. Don't miss it. Information to follow." Koontz commented, "He asked us to be there. And good, he does not need us. I'm going armed, period." In his Ellipse speech, Mr. Trump explicitly directed his supporters to march on the Capitol. At one point, in reply to a line in his speech, that we will not let them silence your voices. We're not going to let it happen. A portion of the rally crowd chanted, "Fight for Trump, fight for Trump," when he repeatedly exhorted his supporters to walk down to the U.S. Capitol to help prevent Congress's planned certification. They listened. Law enforcement witnesses at and near the Capitol on January 6 described large crowds descending upon the Capitol grounds from the direction of the Ellipse rally. And video and photographic evidence shows that hundreds of individuals in attendance at the Ellipse rally were later participants in the Capitol siege and in some cases were among the most violent of rioters. During the siege, Mr. Trump's supporters continued to heed his words. Video evidence from that afternoon shows rioters in real time crediting Mr. Trump for their presence and conduct at the Capitol. For example, as the crowd sought to push past officers protecting the Capitol's east front, one rioter shouted, "We were invited here. We were invited by the President of the United States." Inside, another rioter yelled at officers to stand down. "You're outnumbered. There's 1 million of us out here, and we're listening to Trump. Your boss." That rioter was later convicted of obstruction and of assaulting an officer, among other violations. At 11, as the day wore on, rioters continued to obey more Mr. Trump's commands. At 4:25 p.m., just 8 minutes after Mr. Trump's video tweet telling supporters that they were very special but should go home now, rioter Edward Vallejo, a member of the Oath Keepers, posted to a group signal chat that our commander-in-chief has just ordered us to go home. Another rioter, Jacob Chansley, played that video tweet to a crowd at the Capitol and announced that Donald Trump has asked everybody to go home. Chansley left the Capitol at that point, having earlier breached the Senate chamber, taken a seat at the dais, and declared Vice President Pence to be a traitor. After January 6th, when rioters began to face accountability for their unlawful acts at the Capitol, many pointed to Mr. Trump in an attempt to excuse or mitigate their conduct. For example, following his arrest on charges stemming from Capitol siege rioter Alex Harkrider sought release from pretrial detention by urging that, like thousands of others at the Capitol, Mr. Harkrider was responding to the entreaties of the then Commander-in-Chief, former President Donald Trump. Requesting pretrial release in part because defendant was responding to the entreaties of the then Commander-in-Chief, President Trump. Arguing that Chansley was incited by Mr. Trump and noting his unsuccessful request for presidential pardon. In closing argument at trial on seditious conspiracy and other charges related to January 6, defense counsel unsuccessfully asked the jury to acquit Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio because, in part, it was Mr. Trump's anger that caused what occurred on January 6, and it was not Enrique Tarrio. And at sentencing in January 6 cases, many rioter defendants, whether expressing remorse or not, have sought leniency by blaming Mr. Trump both for their presence at the Capitol and their underlying belief that the 2020 presidential election was fraudulent and that they must take to stop the transaction of the presidency. Citing language of the Ellipse rally and stating, "I trusted the president, and that was a big mistake." Mr. Trump was not subject to effective prosecution in another jurisdiction. The next consideration under the principles of federal prosecution is whether Mr. Trump was subject to effective prosecution in another jurisdiction. The office concluded that a prosecution carried out by a single local authority could not effectively hold him accountable for his efforts targeting the only election for national office. Although Mr. Trump was theoretically subject to state criminal charges for his conduct, based on the scope and magnitude of Mr. Trump's alleged crimes, no local prosecution could effectively hold Mr. Trump accountable for his attempts to overturn the valid results of the election, obstruct the congressional certification, disenfranchisement million of voters. Indeed, all citizens, not just the citizens in the 7 contested states that he targeted with his criminal plan, suffered the impact of Mr. Trump's crimes, warranting a federal prosecution accounting for all his conduct and the federal interests in it implicated. In addition, when the office was making its charging decision in the summer of 2023, no other jurisdiction had initiated charges against Mr. Trump or co-conspirators. After the grand jury returned the original indictment against Mr. Trump, in this case, however, he subsequently was also charged with racketeering conspiracy in Georgia. Defense case pending since August 2023 in Fulton County Superior Court. Although the 40-count indictment in Fulton County encompasses some of the same core conduct for which Mr. Trump was charged federally in the District of Columbia, its focus is on conspiracy to commit fraud, that is, to change the outcome of the election, including through false statements to Georgia state legislatures and other high-ranking state officials. It does not fully address Mr. Trump's alleged criminal conduct in furtherance of a conspiracy to obstruct the January 6th certification proceeding or a conspiracy against voters' rights, as described above. There are strong federal interests in protecting the integrity of the certification proceeding and the right to vote and have one's vote counted. There was no adequate non-criminal alternative to prosecution. Given the strong federal interest in holding Mr. Trump accountable described above, the office could not identify any adequate non-criminal alternative to prosecute. To be sure, because he was president at the time of his alleged offenses, Mr. Trump was subject to impeachment and was in fact impeached, though he was not convicted. Impeachment, however, was not intended to be a substitute for criminal prosecution. The framers recognized that most likely there would be 2 sets of proceedings for individuals who commit impeachable offenses: the impeachment trial and a separate criminal trial. The impeachment judgment clause itself expressly contemplates separate proceedings, stating that the punishment for impeachment and conviction shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold any and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Not only are impeachment and prosecution separate and distinct proceedings, they apply different standards and pursue different objectives. When Congress decides whether a president should be impeached and convicted, that process does not depend on rigorously adjudicating facts and applying law or on finding a criminal violation. Instead, the impeachment process is, by design, an inherently political remedy for the dangers to governance posed by an officeholder who has committed treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Congress may decide not to impeach or convict for reasons that have little or no connection to the nature of the evidence of the officer's culpable conduct. For example, the political alignment of Congress may prevent impeachment and conviction without regard to the officer's conduct. Indeed, prior to 2020, no senator had ever voted to convict an impeached president of the same political party. And in cases like this, where the president has left office by the time an impeachment trial occurs, senators may question their authority to convict, regardless of the egregiousness of the conduct at issue. During Mr. Trump's impeachment trial, his counsel insisted that the outcome of the proceeding would have no bearing on any future criminal prosecution, stating, clearly a former civil officer who is not impeached is subject to criminal prosecution, noting that if a president committed a criminal offense, then after he is out of office, you go and arrest him, adding that the Department of Defense does not know what to do with such people. Senators who voted to acquit Mr. Trump expressed a similar view. Senator McConnell stating that Mr. Trump is still liable for everything he did while he was in office as an ordinary citizen, and noting that we have a criminal justice system in this country. Thus, even if Mr. Trump had been convicted by the Senate, political accountability in the form of impeachment would not have been an adequate alternative for criminal accountability, especially considering the scope of Mr. Trump's offenses and the substantial federal interests they targeted. Mr. Trump's conduct had no historical analog. During pretrial litigation, Mr. Trump contended that his conduct was materially indistinguishable from that of other actors throughout American history, including past presidents and vice presidents, who had either claimed that an election was tainted by fraud or presided over a certification proceeding at the joint session where electoral votes were in dispute. Mr. Trump further argued that because these actors had been prosecuted for their purportedly similar conduct, it would be unconstitutional to prosecute him for his conduct because so doing would violate his right to fair notice or result in selective or vindicated prosecution. That is, even accepting that Mr. Trump engaged in the conduct alleged in the indictment and that such conduct violated the charged statutes, he maintained that prosecution was improper because it conflicted with historical practice. The historical episodes that Mr. Trump invoked arising from the elections in 1800, 1824, 1876, 1960, 2000, 2004, and 2016 did not involve similar conduct and did not supply a valid reason to decline to bring charges here. In litigation, the office addressed each historical episode. He cited and explained why none was meaningfully similar to the charged conduct. Taken together, those episodes showed that there have been times, as in 1800, 1876, and 1960, when genuine questions have arisen over which slate of electors from a particular state has been duly appointed. There have also been times, as in 1824, when the failure of any candidate to obtain a majority of electoral votes has thrown the election to the House of Representatives, and there have been times, as in 2000 and 2004 and 2016, when those dissatisfied with the results have sought to raise objections to the electoral vote count, resulting in either the objections being overruled or, in one case, a brief adjournment designed as an Ohio-focused protest vote without the hope of even the hint of overturning the victory of the president. But none of the historical episodes at issue involved in any attempt by any person to use fraud and deceit to obstruct or defeat the governmental function that would result in the certification of the lawful winner of the presidential election. The district court found that there were no historical analogs to Mr. Trump's alleged criminal conduct. When Mr. Trump filed a motion to dismiss the indictment on a claim that he was being selectively prosecuted because of a historical track record of similar unprosecuted efforts to challenge elections, the district court rejected it, explaining that Mr. Trump was not being prosecuted for publicly contesting the results of the election. He is being prosecuted for knowingly making false statements in furtherance of a criminal conspiracy and for obstruction of election certification proceedings. Likewise, in its opinions denying Mr. Trump's immunity motion, the district court found that none of the contested elections Mr. Trump invokes is analog to this case, as none involved any allegation that any official engaged in criminal conduct to obstruct the electoral process. Investigative procedure and policy. Upon appointing the special counsel, the Attorney General explained that the appointment underscores the department's commitment to both independence and accountability. In particularly sensitive matters, it also allows prosecutors and agents to continue their work expeditiously and to make decisions indisputably guided only by the facts and the law. See press release, Office of Public Affairs, Department of Justice, Appointment of Special Counsel. The Attorney General also noted that although the Special Counsel will not be subject to the day-to-day supervision of any official of the Department, he must comply with the regulations, procedures, and policies of the Department. The Office conducted its work accordingly. The investigative process. Give me 1 second, guys. Employing traditional investigative tools, including voluntary interviews, grand jury subpoenas, and search warrants, and subject to the same legal requirements. Binding on all federal prosecutors, the office spanning the period predating the special counsel's appointment to the completion of its work, developed a thorough record of independently verified facts on which it based its prosecutive decisions in the election case. The investigative record comprised voluntary witness interviews and grand jury testimonies from numerous individuals, as well as voluminous records such as emails, text messages, encrypted messages, memoranda, and other documents. These records were obtained through both voluntary productions by dozens of witnesses and through compulsory process and court orders, including grand jury subpoenas directed to witnesses and entities, court orders for non-content information, such as sender, recipient, date, and time, from electronic communication accounts, and search warrants to obtain evidence from physical sources and or locations, electronic devices, and emails, iCloud accounts. The office also obtained records from other components of the Department of Justice, including the U.S. Attorney General's Office for the District of Columbia and other federal agencies, including the National Archives, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Defense, and the Office of Director of National Intelligence. Further, the office collected more than 1 terabyte of data from publicly available sources such as social media postings and websites. All discoverable material was provided or made available to Mr. Trump in discovery during the prosecution of the election case. Throughout its work, the office compiled with the rules, regulations, procedures, practices, and policies of the Department of Justice, including consulting the Justice Manual, the Department's publicly available guidebook on policies and procedures, and consulting or obtaining requisite approvals from the Department components. For example, as required under the Justice Manual, the office obtained approvals from the Criminal Division's Office of Enforcement Operations, which provides legal guidance on the use of sensitive law enforcement tools, such as certain subpoenas and search warrants involving attorneys. And as discussed more below, the office consulted the Criminals Division Public Integrity Section, which oversees the investigation and prosecution of federal crimes affecting government integrity pursuant to Justice Manual requirements pertaining to the service of subpoenas and other processes of Congress. The use of election fraud charges in the Department's election year sensitivities policy, a long-standing Department policy regarding the conduct of sensitive investigations during an election year. Even when not required in accordance with the best traditions of the Department, the office actively sought advice and guidance from subject matter experts throughout the Department. For example, the office requested assistance from the Civil Division and Office of Information Policy on civil litigation for public access to investigative and prosecutive materials. And the office conferred with the Office of Solicitor General, which is responsible for the supervising and conducting government litigation in the United States Supreme Court. The Office of the Legal Counsel, which provides binding legal advice to the executive branch, and the Criminal Division's Appellate Section, which conducts and oversees the Department's criminal appellate litigation on complex statutory, constitutional, and legal issues, including regarding charging decisions in the original and superseding indictments. Mr. Trump's challenge to the district court orders on extrajudicial statements, Mr. Trump's executive privileges, and Mr. Trump's immunity challenge to the indictment. Investigative and prosecutive procedures in an election year. Mr. Trump's announcement of his candidacy for president while 2 federal criminal investigations were ongoing presented an unprecedented challenge for the Department of Justice and the courts. Given the timing and the circumstances of the special counsel's appointment and the office's work, it was unavoidable that the regular processes of criminal law and the judicial system would run parallel to the election campaign. Mr. Trump's position was that when the judicial process conflicted with his election campaign, the courts should always yield. As discussed below, the courts did not agree. Under these unique circumstances, the department's actions would be criticized by one constituency or another, regardless of which path the investigations took. Accordingly, the office leaned on established department policy, practice, and wisdom and focused on doing its job promptly and thoroughly. From the outset and throughout its work, the office recognized the weighty issues presented by the matter under its mandate and operated on the principle that the best interests of the department and the nation required prompt investigation and decision-making. The office's exceptional working pace ensured that its investigative work could be completed. Charging decisions could be made and any necessary indictments could be returned by the summer of 2023, long before the election. The office had no interest in affecting the presidential election and it complied fully with the letter and spirit of the department's policy regarding election year sensitivities. It did so through fundamentally sound practices, moving its investigation swiftly, making charging decisions, and returning indictments well before the election litigating its cases on the timetable set forth by the courts and consulting the department's election year sensitivities policy. The staff of the office was deeply familiar with and committed to the department's election year sensitivities policy, as it included fraud and public corruption prosecutors with many years of experience working in and leading. The special counsel himself and one of his counselors had served as chief. 2 of the attorneys had been deputy chiefs, and 2 other attorneys in the office had been trial attorneys. Collectively, prosecutors in the office had many years of experience providing training, advice, and guidance to prosecutors and law enforcement agents throughout the department on how to comply with the department's election-related policies. In fact, the counselor in the office, who had previously served as chief, was one of the drafters of the first election year sensitivities memorandum issued to the department attorneys. The department policy regarding elections has 2 overlapping components. The first is focused on the prosecutor's purpose. It prohibits prosecutors from taking any action or timing any action for the purpose of effecting an election. That flat prohibition applies to all actions by prosecutors and at all times during an investigation or prosecution. The second and overlapping component focuses on safeguarding the department's reputation for fairness and nonpartisanship, requiring that prosecutors take particular care in an election year and consult with PIN when an action is likely to raise an issue or the perception of an issue. These policies are well established within the department. In 2008, in the wake of allegations and investigations concerning politicization in the department, and recognizing that there was uncertainty regarding the terms of the department's policies and practices in election years, the Criminal Division and PIN evaluated feasibility of establishing a specific and definitive set of rules regarding the duty to avoid interference with elections in the run-up to an election. While prosecutors had long been advised to exercise particular care in politically sensitive cases in the 2 or 3 months immediately prior to an election, the department had never had a formal 60-day or 90-day rule that governed such situations. As part of its evaluation in 2008, the department considered whether to codify a particular rule, but ultimately concluded that the best course was instead to provide guidance in the form of an attorney general memorandum addressing the need for particular care to protect the department's reputation for impartiality in an election year and setting forth in writing the core principle that prosecutors and agents may not act for a political purpose. On March 5, 2008, Attorney General Michael Murkowski issued the first election year sensitivities memorandum setting forth this guidance. In relevant part, the Attorney General memorandum stated, Department of Justice employees are entrusted with the authority to enforce the laws of the United States and with the responsibility to do so in a neutral and impartial manner. This is particularly important in an election year. Ooh. Sorry, guys. We're a little bit turned. Oh, man. Now that the election season is upon us, I want to remind you of the department's existing policies with respect to the political activities. The Department of Justice has a strong interest in the prosecution of election fraud and other election crimes, such as those involving federal and state campaign finance laws, federal patronage laws, and corruption of the election process. As department employees, however, we must be particularly sensitive to the safeguarding the department's reputation for fairness, neutrality, and partisanship. Simply put, politics must play no role in the decisions of federal investigators or prosecutors regarding an investigation or criminal charges. Law enforcement officers and prosecutors may never select the timing of investigative steps or criminal charges for the purpose of effecting an election or for the purpose of giving an advantage or disadvantage to any candidate or political party. Such a purpose is inconsistent with the department's mission and with the principles of federal prosecution. If you are faced with a question regarding the timing of charges or overt investigative steps near the time of a primary or general election, please contact the Public Safety Section. Before the Attorney General appointed special counsel, the department codified its election year policies in the Justice Manual. Federal prosecutors and agents may never select the timing of any action, including investigative steps, criminal charges, or statements for the purpose of affecting any election or for the purpose of giving an advantage or disadvantage to any candidate or political party. Such a purpose is inconsistent with the department's mission and with the principles of federal prosecution. Any action likely to raise an issue or the perception of an issue under this provision requires consultation with the Public Integrity Section. And such action shall not be taken if the Public Integrity Section advises that further consultation is required with the Deputy Attorney General or Attorney General. Justice Manual. Implementation of the election year sensitivities policy can raise challenging questions. Taking action may be viewed as hurting a candidate, while refraining from action may be viewed as helping that candidate. This challenging landscape counsels in favor of restructuring timing investigations in a manner that enables prosecutors and agents to avoid these issues as much as possible and do what they do best, focus on the needs of the case. Consistent with that, often counsels prosecutors to move their investigations along promptly and avoid unnecessary delay that could needlessly place them in a position of deciding whether to take overt action or bring charges in the period immediately before an election. Because of the office's deep familiarity and experience with these policies, it focused on completing both its investigations promptly and making timely charging decisions long before the election. Pre-indictment procedures. During the investigation and prosecution of this case, the office consulted regularly with PIN. For example, because the election case involved election fraud under United States Code, the office consulted with PIN and its election crimes branch prior to returning the election case indictment in the District of Columbia as required by Justice Manual such and such. In addition, the office consulted with PIN regarding investigative steps that involved gathering evidence connected to congressional staff pursuant to the Justice Manual. As discussed below in Section 5, the office also consulted PIN regarding issues that arose in litigation involving the speech or debate clause, a unique constitutional protection that provides a form of immunity to legislative acts by members of Congress and their staff. However, because the office proceeded expeditiously with its investigations, charging decisions, no election year sensitivities consultation with PIN was required prior to returning the original indictment in either the classified documents case in June 2023 or the election case in August of 2023. Post-indictment procedures. The two components of the department's election year sensitivities policy play out differently in the context of post-indictment litigation. First, the bedrock principle that prosecutors may not take any action for the purpose of effecting an election or providing an advantage or disadvantage to any candidate or party applies fully during post-indictment litigation. On this score, the office did not take a single action at any point in time for such purpose. Rather, the office's mission was at all times to uphold the law and carefully follow the requirements of the criminal justice process. Unlike the purpose-focused component of department policy, the component that focuses on the department's reputation for impartiality stands on a different footing with respect to pre-indictment and post-indictment activity. This component of the policy applies fully to the timing of actions and post-indictment activity. By prosecutors prior to the indictment, bringing charges, taking over investigative steps, and making public statements. For such actions, prosecutors must take election year sensitivities into account, and they are required to consult with Penn. However, once the case is charged, this component of the policy does not limit the ability to litigate according to the schedule set down by the court and does not require consultation with Penn for such litigation. Whether it is during an election year or any other time, the duty of prosecutors after indictment is to litigate their cases fully and zealously, consistent with the Constitution, United States Code, federal rules of criminal procedure, rules of professional responsibility, and dictates of the calendar set forth by the court. The prosecutor has urged speedy trials, with which I agree, and it's now in the hands of the judicial system, not in our hands. Once a case is charged, no policy of the department limits the ability of prosecutors to litigate effectively on the schedule set by the court, and that is what the office did. Consistent with the department's policy, after indictment, the office litigated the election case according to the schedule set down by the district court, the D.C. Circuit, and the Supreme Court. Given the gravity of the issues presented by the charges, the office sought to move the case forward expeditiously for two central reasons, unrelated to the election. First, the Speedy Trial Act mandates expeditious resolution of criminal cases, and it does so not only for the benefit of the accused, but in the best interest of the public. The Speedy Trial Act was designed with the public interest firmly in mind. The public interest in a broad sense, as well as the constitutional guarantee, commands prompt disposition of criminal charges. Encouragement of delay is fatal to the vindication of the criminal law. Second, those fundamental interests were heightened in this case, which raised matters of utmost gravity, urgency, and national concern. Charging the former president with conspiring to thwart the peaceful transfer of power through lies that undermined the democratic process and ultimately fueled a violent attack at the Capitol of the United States. These criminal charges warranted prompt and fair disposition, and that is what the office sought to achieve. Both during the investigation and after the case was charged, however, Mr. Trump sought to delay the proceedings, taking the position that when the judicial process conflicted with his election campaign, the courts should always yield. Proposing April 2026 trial date, emphasizing that no major party presidential candidate has ever been charged while in the middle of a campaign. Mr. Trump's counsel arguing the easiest solution to all of this is an obvious one, and that is to adjourn the case after the presidential election. That's the solution. Asking court to reconsider rescheduling order, emphasizing the president is the leading candidate in the presidential election, which is just weeks away. The courts did not agree. They consistently rejected Mr. Trump's efforts to delay or stop the proceedings. The court's words and actions throughout the litigation reflected their fundamental commitment to the operation of the judicial process, notwithstanding the election campaign. The public has a right to a prompt and efficient resolution of this matter. The fact that the defendant is engaged in a political campaign is not going to allow him any greater or lesser latitude than any defendant in a criminal case. And so what the defendant is currently doing, the fact that he's running a political campaign currently has to yield to the orderly administration of justice. I cannot and will not factor into my decisions the effect it's going to have on a political campaign for either side. Delaying the trial date until after the election, as Mr. Trump proposes, would be counterproductive, create perverse incentives, and unreasonably burden the judicial process. But there is another fundamental constitutional interest at stake here. The existence of a political campaign or political speech does not alter the court's historical commitment or obligation to ensure the fair administration of justice in criminal courts. A trial participant's engagement in political speech cannot degrade or diminish that essential judicial function. The office also sought to move the election case forward expeditiously in the Supreme Court based upon the public interest in a prompt resolution of the case and the precedent set by Watergate, where the court granted both the United States petition for certiorari before judgment, and also the president's cross petition for before said judgment. Because of the public importance of the issues presented and the need for their prompt resolution, the office filed a petition for before judgment, which would have moved the election case directly to the Supreme Court from the district court and argued that the court should follow the Nixon model. The Supreme Court did not grant the office's petition for before judgment. However, like the D.C. Circuit, the Supreme Court ultimately expedited its consideration of the case, further confirming the office's emphasis on the strong public interest in a prompt resolution. Following the Supreme Court's immunity decision, the office again proceeded in a manner that was fully consistent with the letter and spirit of the department's election year sensitivities policy. Litigating the case according to the schedule established by the district court, taking action based upon the law and the best interests of the case, and consulting with Penn upon receiving the decision, the office immediately began a multifaceted process to determine the best way forward, including a thorough investigation of the opinion itself, an exhaustive and detailed review of the evidence and the allegations in the original indictment to determine whether there was sufficient non-immune evidence to support the charges in light of the opinion. Once the office determined that there was sufficient non-immunized evidence, an evaluation of whether to litigate the case based on the existing grand jury record and indictment, or instead seek a superseding indictment that would be presented to a grand jury and not heard any immunized evidence. And given the timing, evaluate whether all the necessary steps could be undertaken consistent with the election year sensitivities policy. The office determined that there was sufficient non-immunized evidence to support the charges and that the best course of action for the case was to obtain a superseding indictment that implemented the Supreme Court's holding in Trump and present the new indictment to the grand jury that had not heard evidence of immunized conduct. Before doing so, the office consulted the Penn for two purposes: to obtain Penn's concurrence regarding the proposed election fraud cases as required by the Justice Manual, given the timing of the superseding indictment, to consult with Penn regarding election year sensitivities pursuant to Justice Manual and Attorney General's election year sensitivities memorandum. Penn concurred with the return of the superseding indictment, which was returned by the grand jury on August 27, 2024. Following the superseding indictment and consistent with the district court's instructions, on August 30, 2024, the parties submitted their positions regarding the schedule for pretrial proceedings. The office proposed that it file an opening brief regarding immunity, in which it would provide detailed information, without which the court could not undertake the fact-bound analysis that was required by the Supreme Court's remand. The office argued that its filing would include the information that the defense would need to address and that the district court would need to make its immunity determinations regarding both the allegations of the superseding indictment and the evidence that the office would introduce at trial, in a manner that would avoid the prospect of multiple interlocutory appeals. Were the defense to file first on remand, it would leave a large gap in the analysis that the district court was required to undertake, because only the office could identify all the evidence upon which the charges were based and upon which it would rely at trial. The office did not propose a particular date for filing its immunity brief or a schedule for conducting an immunity litigation. I left those matters to the court's discretion. Mr. Trump proposed that the immunity litigation should not begin until December 2024. The district court issued an order setting a new schedule for pretrial litigation and directing the office to file its opening immunity brief on September 26, 2024. Prior to filing its immunity brief, the office again confirmed with Penn that the election year sensitivities policy did not apply to conducting such post-indictment litigation according to the court schedule, and that the Justice Manual did not require consultation with Penn regarding such litigation. And after the office filed its immunity brief and Mr. Trump attempted to delay its public disclosure, the district court again rejected his attempt to conflate the election and the criminal justice process. In addition to the assertions discussed above, defendant's opposition brief repeatedly accuses the government of bad faith partisan bias These accusations, for which the defendant provides no support, continue a pattern of defense filings focusing on political rhetoric rather than addressing the legal issues at hand. Not only is that focus unresponsive and unhelpful to the court, but it is also unbefitting of experienced defense counsel and undermining of the judicial proceeding. Throughout its work, the office was focused entirely on its mandate to uphold the law and nothing more. The career prosecutors in the office conducted its investigation prosecution in a manner that complied fully with the department's policies regarding election year sensitivity. Part 5, investigative challenges and litigation issues. Give me one moment. I'm going to get a quick drink. Give me a like. Give me a comment down there. Let me know how much you enjoy this reading of Jack Smith's report. In a corruption or conspiracy investigation, it is not unusual for a subject or target of the investigation to continue to wield significant influence over or command strong loyalty from potential witnesses, often complicitly, the ability of prosecutors to obtain evidence. That dynamic was amplified in this case, given Mr. Trump's political and financial status and the prospect of his future election to the presidency. As described below, one company resisted a lawful court order issued during the office's investigation. And important witnesses made the choice to assert privilege against providing evidence based on their own official positions in the government. In addition, after his indictment, Mr. Trump used his considerable social media presence to make extrajudicial comments, sometimes of a threatening nature, about the case, and the office was forced to pursue litigations to preserve the integrity of the proceeding and prevent witness intimidation. Mr. Trump also was able to raise claims of executive privilege and presidential immunity. The section discusses each of these challenges and how the office addressed them. Pre-indictment litigation with third parties, the Twitter X search warrant. Mr. Trump's public statements, and specifically his posts on the social media application Twitter, constituted important potential evidence of his criminal conduct and intent. Accordingly, on January 17, 2023, the office applied for and the district court authorized a search warrant requiring Twitter to provide certain information regarding Mr. Trump's Twitter account. At the same time, as is common in non-public criminal investigations, to prevent individuals under investigation from destroying evidence or otherwise hampering the process, the office asked the district court to issue a non-disclosure order, which would direct Twitter that it could not inform Mr. Trump that the office was seeking information regarding his account. The district court granted the request and issued the non-disclosure. The search warrant required Twitter's compliance within 10 days of its issuance. But the day before the deadline, its senior director of legal informed the office that it would not comply with the warrant by the next day. Shortly thereafter, Twitter's senior director of legal further informed the office that it would not comply with the warrant without changes to the NDO, permitting Twitter to notify Mr. Trump of the warrant. Twitter claimed that the NDO impinged on the First Amendment interests in communicating with the former president, which according to Twitter were heightened because the warrant purportedly could implicate issues of executive privilege, though it conceded that it had no standing to raise any privilege issues. The district court later described Twitter's actions as extraordinary and noted that its resistance to the NDO appeared to be first in the company's history. For what appears to be the first time in their nearly 17-year existence as a company, Twitter seeks to vacate or modify an order issued under the Stored Communications Act, commanding that the company not disclose the existence of a search warrant for a user's Twitter account, and further seeks to condition any compliance by the company with which search warrant on the user or user's representative first being notified about the warrant and given an opportunity to stop or otherwise intervene in the execution of the warrant. The office promptly moved in district court to have Twitter show cause why it should not be held in contempt of court, asking the district court to impose a penalty that doubled with each day of noncompliance, starting at $50,000. In rejecting Twitter's basis for refusing to comply with the warrant, the district court emphasized that the search warrant NDO had been issued by this court after being apprised of extensive reasons sufficient to establish probable cause for issuance of the warrant and to meet the statutory requirements for an NDO. To which reasons Twitter is neither privy nor entitled to be privy. The district court rejected Twitter's contentions, finding that there existed compelling government interest to maintain the NDO to preserve the integrity of the investigation, and that as the practical matter, if accepted, Twitter's argument would invite repeated litigation by Twitter and other electronic service communications providers to challenge NDOs in order to alert users to Stored Communications Act orders, particularly for high-profile, high-placed users, such as current or former government officials with whom the providers might want to carry favor. With concomitant and inevitable delays in execution of the Stored Communications Act orders and resultant frustration in expeditiously conducting criminal investigations. The district court ultimately held that the NDO lawfully prohibited Twitter from notifying Mr. Trump about the warrant and fined Twitter $350,000 for failing to comply with the court-ordered search warrant in a timely fashion, finding that Twitter failed to show good faith and substantial compliance in response to the warrant. The sanction and NDO were both upheld by the D.C. Circuit, and the Supreme Court declined to review the case. Upholding NDO where the order was narrowly tailored and the district court specifically found reason to believe that the disclosure of the warrant would jeopardize the criminal investigation. Holding the sanction ultimately imposed was not unreasonable given Twitter's $40 billion valuation and the court's goal of coercing Twitter's compliance. Legislative privilege under the speech or debate clause. The speech or debate clause provides that for any speech or debate in either house shall not be questioned in any other place. The clause affords members of Congress a number of distinct protections, including a testimonial privilege that guarantees a member may not be made to answer questions about his or her legislative acts. During the investigation, former Vice President Pence, in his capacity as President of the Senate, invoked his privilege under the speech or debate clause. Through litigation over the scope and applicability of the claimed privilege, the office obtained important evidence. After the grand jury subpoenaed Mr. Pence to testify about Mr. Trump's alleged efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election, Mr. Pence moved to quash the subpoena, invoking the speech or debate clause. Mr. Pence argued that the vice president should receive the protections of the speech or debate clause when acting in his constitutional capacity as president of the Senate, as he did while presiding over the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. According to Mr. Pence, the speech or debate clause therefore foreclosed questioning before the grand jury about his legislative acts to the joint session. Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, who presides over grand jury matters in that district, denied in large part Mr. Pence's motion to quash. The court held that while the clause does not apply to Vice President, it does not cover the vast majority of what the special counsel seeks to ask him about. The court determined that although the speech or debate clause foreclosed questioning about Mr. Pence's legislative acts, much of the conduct the office sought to question Mr. Pence about did not qualify as legislative acts under the speech or debate clause, including, for example, Mr. Trump's conversations exhorting Pence to reject electors on January 6th. The court concluded that the speech or debate clause precluded government questioning in two subject areas: Mr. Pence's drafting and recitation of the statement he made on the floor of the Senate on January 6th, and internal advice from Mr. Pence's staff about the scope of his authority on January 6th. Neither the office nor Mr. Pence appealed the direct ruling. Threats and harassment of witnesses. A significant challenge that the office faced after Mr. Trump's indictment was his ability and willingness to use his influence and following on social media to target witnesses, courts, and department employees, which required the office to engage in time-consuming litigation to protect witnesses from threats and harassment. Mr. Trump's resort to intimidation and harassment during the investigation was not new, as demonstrated by his actions during the charged conspiracies. A fundamental component of Mr. Trump's conduct underlying the charges in the election case was his pattern of using social media, at the time, Twitter, to publicly attack and seek to influence state and federal officials, judges, and election workers who refused to support false claims that the election had been stolen, or who otherwise resisted complicity in Mr. Trump's scheme. After Mr. Trump publicly assailed these individuals, threats and harassment from his followers inevitably followed. One witness identifying Mr. Trump's tweets about him as the cause of specific and graphic threats about his family, and a public official providing testimony that after Mr. Trump's tweets, he required additional police protection. In the context of the attack on the Capitol on January 6, Mr. Trump acknowledged that his supporters listened to him like no one else. The same pattern transpired after Mr. Trump's indictment in the election case. As the D.C. Circuit later found, Mr. Trump repeatedly attacked those individuals in the case through threatening public statements, as well as messaging daggered at likely witnesses and their testimony. Those attacks had real-time, real-world consequences, exposing those on the receiving end to a torrent of threats and intimidation and turning their lives upside down. The day after his arraignment, for example, Mr. Trump posted on social media application Truth Social, "If you go after me, I'm coming after you." The next day, one of his supporters called the district court judge's chambers and said, "Hey, you stupid slave, expletive, expletive. If Trump doesn't get elected in 2024, we are coming to kill you. So tread lightly, expletive, expletive. You will be targeted personally, publicly, your family, all of it." Mr. Trump also took aim at potential witnesses named in the indictment, lashed out at government officials closely involved in the criminal proceeding, as well as members of their families. To protect the integrity of the proceeding, on September 5, 2023, the office filed a motion seeking an order pursuant to the district court's rules restricting certain out-of-court statements by either party. The district court heard argument and granted the office's motion, finding that Mr. Trump's public attacks pose a significant and immediate threat. Witnesses will be intimidated or otherwise unduly influenced by the prospect of being themselves targeted for harassment or threats. And attorneys, public servants, and other court staff will themselves become targets for threats and harassment. Because no alternative means could adequately address these grave threats to the integrity of these proceedings, the court prohibited the parties and their counsel from making public statements that target the special counsel prosecuting this case or his staff, defense counsel or their staff, any of this court staff, or other supporting personnel, any reasonably foreseeable witness, or the substance of their testimony. The court emphasized, however, that Mr. Trump remained free to make statements criticizing the government generally, including the current administration of the Department of Justice, statements asserting that he is innocent of the charges against him, or that his prosecution is politically motivated, or statements criticizing the campaign platforms or policies of his political rivals. Mr. Trump appealed, and that D.C. Circuit affirmed in large part, finding that Mr. Trump's attacks on witnesses in this case posed a significant and imminent threat to individuals' willingness to participate fully and candidly in the process, to the content of their testimony and evidence, and to the official's essential truth-finding function, with the undertow generated by such statements likely to influence other witnesses and deter those not yet publicly identified, out of fear that if they come forward, they may well be the next target. Likewise, certain speech about counsel and staff working on the cases poses a significant and imminent risk of impeding the adjudication of the case, since messages designed to generate alarm and dread and to trigger extraordinary safety precautions will necessarily hinder the trial process and slow the administration of justice. The Court of Appeals explained that the district court's order involved the confluence of two paramount constitutional interests: the freedom of speech guaranteed by the First Amendment and the federal court's vital Article III duty to ensure the fair and orderly administration of justice in criminal cases. Balancing these interests, the court explained, required consideration of three related questions: whether the order is justified by a sufficiently serious risk of prejudice to an ongoing judicial proceeding, whether less restrictive alternatives would adequately address that risk, and whether the order is narrowly tailored, including whether the order effectively addresses the potential prejudice. Because the record amply supported the district court's finding that when Mr. Trump has publicly attacked individuals, including on matters related to this case, those individuals are consequently threatened and harassed, and because no less speech restrictive alternative could viably protect against the imminent threat to the participation of witnesses, trial participants, and staff in this criminal matter, or the full, fair, and unobstructed receipt of relevant evidence, the court affirmed the decision to impose some limitation on trial participants' speech. Indeed, given the record in this case, the district court had a duty to act proactively to prevent the creation of an atmosphere of fear or intimidation aimed at preventing trial participants and staff from performing their functions within the trial process. The Court of Appeals therefore affirmed the district court's order to the extent that it prohibited parties and their counsels from making public statements about the investigation or in this criminal proceeding, or public statements about counsel in the case other than the special counsel, members of the court staff and counsel staffs, or the family members of any counsel or staff member if those statements are made with the intent to materially interfere with or to cause others to materially interfere with counsel's or staff's work in this criminal case, or with the knowledge that such interference is highly likely to result. To ensure that going forward, the order was narrowly tailored as possible, the court vacated the district court order to the extent it covered speech beyond those specified categories. Mr. Trump's claims of executive privilege. A time-consuming investigative challenge that the office faced was Mr. Trump's broad invocation of executive privilege to prevent witnesses from providing evidence on a variety of topics. Mr. Trump asserted a form of executive privilege known as the Presidential Communications Privilege, a special privilege belonging to presidents that the Supreme Court has found derives from the Constitution's design of the executive branch and separation of powers. With respect to the 14 executive branch officials, Mr. Trump's repeated assertion of the presidential communication privilege as a basis to withhold evidence required extensive pre-indictment litigation that delayed the office's receipt of important testimony and other evidence, including testimony from senior White House staff and executive branch officials about topics such as Mr. Trump's knowledge that he had lost the election and the pressure campaign Mr. Trump waged against the vice president to convince him to reject legitimate elector slates at the January 6th certification proceeding. The courts uniformly rejected Mr. Trump's privilege assertions, seeking to deny the grand jury from hearing evidence from the executive employees. Finding that the evidence was directly relevant, important, and essential to the office's investigation as well as unavailable elsewhere. In each instance, the courts determined that the importance and unavailability of that vital evidence outweighed the qualified privilege for presidential communications and ordered that it be produced promptly to the grand jury. Media access, and when Mr. Trump tried to delay the investigation even further by seeking to stay orders denying his executive privilege claims pending appeal, district and appellate courts rejected all of them. In so doing, one court held that Mr. Trump was engaging in an obvious effort to delay the investigation and impede the grand jury from carrying out its constitutional responsibilities, and separately observed that the staying proceedings risked indefinite delay. The court thus declines to further pause the grand jury's constitutionally protected work, particularly in the absence of any reassurance that the former president's delay tactics will cease. Another court concluded that Mr. Trump claimed that the impact of delay on the investigation would be nominal was a vast understatement, noting instead that it would be serious and deleterious and would harm the public interest. The presidential communications privilege covers evidence that reflects presidential decision-making and deliberations that the president believes should remain confidential. The law on the presidential communication privilege derives from the Supreme Court's decision with Nixon. There, the court recognized a presumptive privilege for presidential communications, which is described as fundamental to the operation of government and inextricably rooted in the separation of powers under the Constitution. But the court held that the privilege is qualified, not absolute, emphasizing our historic commitment to the rule of law, which is nowhere more profoundly manifest than in our view that the twofold aim of criminal justice is that guilt shall not escape or innocence suffer. Specifically, the court weighed the importance of the general privilege of the confidentiality of presidential communications in performance of the president's responsibilities against the inroads of such a privilege on the fair administration of criminal justice. And it concluded that the generalized assertion of privilege must yield to the demonstrated specific need for evidence in the pending criminal trial. The circuit has applied the same general standard to the grand jury subpoenas. Most of the executive privilege litigation in this case took place in 5 sealed proceedings between August 2022 and March 2023, concerning the testimony of 14 witnesses in total. In August 2022, before the special counsel was appointed, the government began to seek evidence from two former executive branch employees of Mr. Trump's, including by ensuring subpoenas for testimony before the grand jury. Although the government believed it unlikely that the information that it sought from these witnesses was subject to the presidential communications privilege because it did not concern presidential decision-making, in an abundance of caution, given the unprecedented circumstances of investigating the former president, the government made certain notifications to determine whether executive privilege would be a contested issue. Specifically, with the district court's permission. Man. Sorry. I have to go back. Well, we've been at this for some time. I think I'm going to have to continue this in a part 2. I'll see ya.